Call the Admin and Finance Committee to order. Roll call, please.
Dr. Beebe?
Here.
Dr. Beebe is present. Ms. Volpe?
Here.
Ms. Volpe is present. Ms. Bradford? Here. Ms. Bradford is present. Mr. Garvey? Here. Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gill?
Present.
Mr. Gill is present. Ms. Hill?
Present.
Ms. Hill is present. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee is present. Dr. Moranti?
Present.
Dr. Moranti is present. Ms. Orange-Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange-Jones is present. Mr. Romer?
Here.
Mr. Romer is present. Mr. Wagasback? Mr. Wagasback is not present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. First item.
The consent agenda is ready for approval, but because of comment cards, we will be pulling 2-2, 2-3, 2-4, 3-1, and 8-2 from the consent agenda.
Okay, so that's just 2.1 is the only item that remains?
That's correct.
Okay, do I have a motion on item 2.1 for the consent agenda?
So moved.
Ms. Bofield, do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Jones? Is there any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
On page 3, item 2.2, consideration of grants allocations of $1 million or less approved by the State Superintendent of Education, the Chair of the Administration and Finance Committee, and the BESE President. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive?
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, a second?
Second.
Mr. Lee? We do have one comment card. Ms. Barrios?
Oh, I have I have a question.
Huh?
Should we let her speak, then we ask the questions?
Yeah, let's let her speak.
Okay.
Okay?
Let her speak first.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany. I just have a question or clarification. I probably don't understand this process, but if you all are being asked to approve or not approve of these, I don't understand. After the fact, I think I've asked this question before. If the money has already been expended and the service has already been provided, why is BESE after the fact being asked to approve it? What happens if BESE doesn't approve? So, and it looks like that's the case with this this particular superintendent's collaboration funding, which it says was from 7/01/13 to 8/30.
I believe that interim approval was requested by the Department of the Finance Committee. That was granted. We then went ahead and extended we had the conference. If the board does not create final approval, then the districts would not be reimbursed for their travel to the conference.
Okay, thank you.
Any board discussion? Ms. Beebe?
On page 20, there's an RSD contract summary report, and I certainly referenced the concern this morning about $50,000 being spent to develop and lead a week-long leadership institute designed specifically
Dr.
for...
Beebe, are we maybe not yet on that item?
It's 2.2, right?
What page?
That's 2.4, I think,
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let's see.
Okay. I have a question.
Ms. Hill?
To my understanding, when when the board approved to give the superintendent autonomy to approve funding, I thought the approval was for $50,000 or less. So this is $1 million or less approval. So when did we begin to allow the superintendent, the chair of the finance committee, and board president to approve $1 million grant without coming to the board first?
I think there's some technical confusion. This is not an approval. We're not coming to you for approval of a contract. We're coming to you for a report. We're providing you a report to receive of something that you have already approved. We received interim approval on spending on this particular cost item, which is just travel reimbursement for school systems at a conference. And we're now providing you a report. We're asking you just to receive the report.
Ms. Hill, I'm sorry.
You're right, Ms. Hill, about the rules you said. I only have discretion under $50,000.
Any other Questions or discussion?
I was wondering if the superintendent is planning on telling us how this went in his updates tomorrow, or if he would like to talk to us about it now.
I'd be happy to. Tomorrow, I think tomorrow I will do it in my comments. I'm just going to talk through academic issues at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 8, item 2.3, consideration of LDE contracts of $50,000 and under approved by the State Superintendent of Education. The motion is to receive.
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, do I have a second? Mr. Romer? Any discussion on this item?
Members, if I could just note that I recognize that these are items on which we have discretion, but just for your sake on background, on these items, these are all legislatively required items that direct the department as a pass-through to spend on these programs.
Dr. Beebe?
Yes, on page 17, it really, the words kind of lifted from the page with regard to Oak Grove Recreation and Civic Club, enhancing community, I guess a civic center, with floor care and maintenance and upgrade. Well, I could understand computer labs, but, I just, was taken aback by, the building, making renovations or repairs to the building. And that building, I'm sure, belongs to the community. So is that our charge to make renovations to buildings?
Again, this is just something that the legislature appropriated funds for. What they then need to do is a budgetary exercise. The legislature then needs to say, okay, we want to spend $10,000 on this. We have to find a department's budget that most closely matches whatever the legislature determined to spend money on. They then send the money through us, they put it in our budget, and we are supposed to pass it on through to this group. The legislature can't just send a check to somebody. They have to send it through an agency's budget, so that's really all this is.
Oh, so I got you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I understand.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lee?
I noticed several of these items look like they might be special appropriations. I would have a little bit of concern about, is anybody policing them or seeing that they're meeting their obligations? I doubt that, there's much oversight. I don't know any way to stop it, but
Well, ostensibly, as with any legislative order, the accountability goes through the legislature, and whatever the appropriate committee is can oversee it.
I understand.
We do have one speaker, Ms. Berrios.
Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. It's amazing what you learn at BESE meetings. So this is basically, this is sort of like a money laundering thing for the legislature. Do they, instead of going through their NGO or having this appear on their NGO, or does it, they go to another agency and appropriate the money and has that agency allocate those fundings? I'm not quite understanding how this is a flow-through. Why the Department of Ed on these? Some of it's related, I can see, or it appears to relate, but
Ma'am, the legislature decides it wants to spend money. A majority of the legislature votes to include that in the budget. It's included in the budget, but it's a new thing. It's not assigned to an agency. And the legislature itself is not an administrative organization. We are an administrative organization, as is, say, the Department of Environmental Quality or the, wildlife. Their monies are sent through those administrative entities, and they then administer the money. I wish I could say it it's just a technical thing.
so why is it before BESE to approve or to receive?
It's actually not to approve, it's just to receive. Just as with anything else, we're providing the public and the board a report of what's going on.
Any other discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 19, item 2.4, consideration of RSD contracts of $50,000 and under approved by the State Superintendent of Education. The motion is to receive.
Do we have a motion to receive?
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, a second. Mr. Lee?
Members, if I might, on this category, just remind you, this would be akin to a school system with roughly 80 schools deciding that it's going to spend monies in various ways for various services. That's what this entails.
Okay.
Dr. Beebe?
And Superintendent White, I fully appreciate what you're saying, but I will also add that, we have leadership in this state, and many retired superintendents who are leaders, and you have them employed. And why are we paying to an entity $50,000? I just had within my district a leadership in service, if you will, a boot camp. But you pick your superstars, and we have to be very conservative with our funds in traditional settings, and I hope that we would do the same in RSD. I can appreciate your comments that it's their money, but it's tax dollars, and I just feel, every day when I not every day because I don't come here every day, but when I come to Baton Rouge, I see new faces. So either there's high turnover within this department, or we're hiring. And I'm saying with the staff, and I'm traditional, speaking to past experience. When I would come to Baton Rouge, we had people on staff back in the trenches. Individuals knew who to call. They would speak to those experts within the department. These were the leaders and the experts. They were knowledgeable, and they would give immediate feedback. I'm just in awe that we're spending $50,000 for 25 principals, and what a district could do with $50,000.
Well, this is a district. This is the Recovery School District taking their MFP dollars, and they're spending it on principal training. Is one of the things you see in front of you. You're right. You're right.
Yes, I'm fully aware of this, but I'm saying we have the experts. Some in your administration, retired, Grace Sloan, the gentleman from Rapides Parish. They're here as part of the network. What would it have done to take them out of your office it was during the summer, I would assume, because the money, as I understand, has already been spent, to send them to the RSD. What I'm saying is the $50,000 could have been better spent, as I see it, on the needs of students, providing the resources to the classroom so that there will be effective outcomes. But to me, this is a lot of money for 1 week for 25 principals. Also, that's not the end of my concern. What I need a clarification of the 15, 18, 20, 15, all these amounts to...
Dr. Beebe, could you take them one at a time and be specific, please?
Well, it's the stipend to the charter school to cover relocation costs due to the school facilities master plan. What does that mean?
It means that when the school relocates, it needs money to do that, like moving vans, for example, or moving men and women to come help move the furniture and the computers.
So in other words, it's to do custodial maintenance type?
It's to move an entire school. It's a big school, to move it from one building to the next. That's the cost of their move.
That's interesting.
Well,
We're paying a mover.
okay.
Did you have another one, Dr. Beebe? Did you have another one?
Well, it's all over the page, but I'm not going to waste your time. He's explained, but...
Ms. Hill, do you have a question?
Yes, in reference to the master plan, I know as a board member, I've been consistently asking to see this master plan. And every time we have a meeting, there's always money allocated to the master plan, or these buildings to the master plan. And I'm speaking for myself as a new board member. I don't even know what the master plan looks like. So you can be giving me information, it may not be accurate information, which I know there are 6 phases of the master plan. But I had to seek other resources to try to even get the master plan when I'm a board member.
I think you could just go to rsdla.net, and it's right on the homepage of the RSD. I'd be happy, in fact, Mr. Bordelon, if you could, or Mr. Hoff, or one of you, if you could send Ms. Hill a copy of the link, that'd be great. rsdla.net, it's right there on the page.
Any other questions from board members on this item? We have one speaker, Ms. Berrios. Okay. Any objection to the motion?
I object.
Dr. Beebe objects. Motion carries. Next item.
Page 21, item 3.1, consideration of ratification of the BESE FY 2015 through 2019 strategic plan submitted to the Division of Administration. The motion is to ratify.
Do we have a motion to ratify?
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, Dr. Moranti. Any discussion on this item? This was a result of BESE appointed a committee. This committee met, and I can tell you I was involved in it. We worked really hard in trying to take a document that was very onerous to develop what we considered a plan that met where BESE is today and where the board is and what we're trying to do. So I appreciate the work of the group that did this, and I want to compliment Heather on her work in being the one to pull that together and then to put the metrics behind it before it was submitted to the Division of Administration. That was nice work, Heather. Okay, we have one speaker on this item, Ms. Berrios. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
There has been a request to take items 6.1 through 6.5 out of order. I need a motion.
And what is the reason for that, Andrew?
There is one item on the HE agenda that needs to be approved before we can move on to section 4.
Okay, so that's 6.1 through which item?
6.5.
Do I have a motion to...
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, do I have a second? Ms. Bradford? Okay, we have a motion and the objection to moving those out of order. Okay, motion carries. So these are the 8G items, right? Kim, if you don't mind, if you would come up and give us an overview, and I'm not sure, do we have comment cards on these items? So what I'd like to do after she gives us an overview is to consider if it's appropriate to take them as a unit, but we'll see what the input is and what the questions may be.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Kim Truffaut, AG Director. For item 6.1, it's actually a budget revision to the program and budget for the New Schools Incubation Grant that was approved in June of 2013. So this item is just clarifying expenditure categories for the Believe and Succeed grants that were awarded to school districts as well as nonprofit organizations and local education agencies. So this is just a simple budget revision that we'll need approval for. The next 4 items are the last 4 statewide programs that need to be approved by the board for the 13-14 fiscal year. And these programs support the academic and vocational enhancement of the BESE special schools.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll if you remain a minute and see if any of the board members have a question.
We're taking these items one at a time. I know she said the next 4.
Well, we certainly can if we.
I would like to.
Okay, we can
Please.
certainly do that.
So the first one is the budget revision.
Okay, so do I have a motion to approve item 6.1? Ms. Bradford, do I have a second? Ms. Jones? Okay, so let's open it up for discussion. Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
On page 96, item 6.2, consideration of 8G funding cycle activities, academic vocational enhancement of the BESE Special Schools, LSD.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, do I have a second? Ms. Bradford? Any discussion from the board? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 100, item 6.3, consideration of 8G funding cycle activities, Academic Vocational Enhancement of BESE Special Schools, LSVI. The recommendation is to approve.
Do we have a motion to approve?
So
Ms.
moved.
Bofi, do you have a second?
Second.
Ms. Jones? Any discussion on this item? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 106, item 6.4, consideration of 8G funding cycle activities, academic vocational enhancement of BESE Special Schools, SEC. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ms. Bofi? Second? Ms. Bradford? Any discussion on this item?
I just have a question. With all the different items that we're approving, to me, they're similar to one another. It's the same thing, academic vocational enhancement for BESE Special Schools. Could you please explain this?
It's for, one is for the Louisiana School for the Visually Impaired, one is for the Louisiana School for the Deaf, one is for the Special Education Center, and then at the Louisiana School for the Visually Impaired, they have a lending library, or lending of materials.
Okay.
So it may appear to be, all the same, but it's for the separate agencies.
Okay.
And so each one of them are awarded the $30,000, and in the instance of the lending library, the materials center, it's $75,000, so.
Okay.
Any further discussion on 6.4? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 111, item 6.5, consideration of 8G funding cycle activities, enhancement of the Louisiana Instructional Materials Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, LSVI. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion, Ms. Bradford? Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Jones? Ms. Orange Jones? Any discussion on this item? Any objections to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
We will be returning back to the normal order on the agenda. Page 22, item 4.1, consideration of the LDE budget. The recommendation is to receive.
Okay, do I have a recommendation to receive the LDE budget?
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, second. Ms. Bradford? Any discussion on this item? Ms. Berrios? Any objection to the motion? Dr. Beebe?
Well, now I needed to ask a question. This might be appropriate. As you all know, I made a request about performance pay, and I was told that I could address it in 8.1, but 8.1 deals with course choice, and so performance pay, I think, would be suitable to discuss here. Would you allow me to ask a question?
Sure.
I'm going to ask Superintendent White, are all school systems implementing the performance pay for teachers this 2013-14 school year? Are you aware that all systems?
What do you mean implementing?
Excuse me?
Tell me, what do you mean implementing the pay?
Performance pay.
Yeah.
Remember, we were asked to submit performance pay. As superintendents, we had to present to you the performance pay according to BAM experience.
Yeah, I think all districts, I know all districts are addressing and implementing the policy. I think there is variation in terms of the schedule in which they're implementing it. I also think that different districts are addressing the issue of the legislature's subsequent appropriation of dollars for teacher raises in different ways. So there's been a lot of complexity added to it, but yes, I believe every district is in the process of implementing it.
Okay, but I think what you're referencing is the 2.75% where the legislature mandated that districts provide 50% to certificated personnel.
I'm referring to both that and the mandates of Act 1, where my staff worked with every district to change their compensation scales, and districts did that.
Now, is there any flexibility in providing that funding this 13-14 school year? In essence, could a district superintendent decide to implement the funding in 2014-15? rather than 13-14?
I believe you could read the law that way. But it really is, the law is what the law is, and there's no BESE regulations on it, it's just a law. And so it's up to the local district to interpret it.
Well, if it specifically says 13, it must be implemented 13-14, then that is law, and that all school systems in Louisiana should implement performance pay this year.
Okay?
Okay,
If
and
that's what you're
so
saying.
I'm asking you, because it's my understanding all districts were required to provide that information to you, that plan. And
Correct.
I'm wondering if you had the time to review it, and if so, are we all being held to the same standards? And I will put the period there, because it's not my intent to, call out others, but just to have an understanding of what the law says and that all districts are compliant with law.
Got it.
Any other discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 25, item 4.2, consideration of federal, state grants and allocations to LEAs, type 2 and 5 charter schools, approved non-public schools, and community-based organizations. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ms. Beaufy, do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, thank you. Members, as you may know, in the past, federal dollars that are supposed to go towards school turnaround have been spent in what too often is kind of a haphazard way, and rigorous plans for turnaround have not always been implemented and yielded really transformative outcomes. Secondly, a lot of our charter school funding that's been provided in new charter schools has been provided on the back end, so you kind of rewarding people for doing something they've already done, rather than on the front end where you're giving people money to develop something new. Finally, a lot of the more innovative efforts toward new school development have been charter school focused, not traditional district focused, and I think that's a mistake because, as has been pointed out today, most of our kids are served in traditional public schools. This year, the department combined the federal dollars with 8G dollars, said it doesn't matter whether you're a charter school or traditional school system or an individual educator, we're just going to take entrepreneurial, innovative applications, and that has allowed us for new school development, and that has allowed us, we think, to grow new school development at a much more rapid clip. You're addressing traditional educators, traditional school systems, as well as charter educators and charter school systems, and that has yielded a crop of Believe and Succeed applicants for this new grant program to transform struggling schools that we think will yield 50 new schools and 18,000 students in D and F schools covered by this application. Most of the grant money goes toward traditional school systems, 66%. Another roughly 20% goes to individual educators. Another roughly 20% goes to charter school districts. These are grants that go toward individual educators to be trained as principals, towards school systems that have cohorts of principals that will be trained, as well as toward charter organizations. I was with Superintendent Lemoyne, well, one of the Superintendent Lemoynes in Avoyelles, or in Rapides last week to celebrate Avoyelles' application. We were across the state in Jefferson last week celebrating Jefferson's application, in Baton Rouge as well, to talk about some of the charter school applications. So this is an exciting step toward new school development, but not just focusing on charter schools. I'm really thrilled about the leadership development Superintendent Lemoyne and others will be doing, and I'm thrilled about the Orchard Foundation's involvement and Rapides Foundation's involvement and a set of fantastic partners across the state. So I appreciate the opportunity to present this today.
Thank you, Superintendent White. Any discussion from the board? Ms. Hill?
Yes. My question would be for the Believe and Succeed funding, which was $5.7 million. Now, to my understanding, this Believe and Succeed program or funding is allocated for DNF schools to identify proven school operators, charter school operators within districts. Help me under. We're giving $5.7 million to this Believe and Succeed program to identify charter authorizers or operators to come in and take over low-performing schools?
No, most of the money, 66%, is given to school systems. 20%.
No, I understand that. I'm asking about the $5.7 million.
Are you on item number 2?
Yes.
Yeah. So of that 5.7, 66% goes to traditional school systems, not to charter school operators. About 20% goes to charter school operators. About 20% goes to traditional school educators. Those districts, charter operators, and traditional educators are then going to go on to train. Either if you're a district, you're going to train new principals. If you're a charter operator, you'll train new principals. If you're an individual, you'll then go on and receive new training to start your own new school. By that combination of groups, we will have roughly 50 new schools. Those new school visions will transform current DNF-rated schools, and they will impact roughly 18,000 students.
Okay, my next question will be with the NSECD program, which is the Early Childhood Development Program. Next to their amount is 0, so we're not funding them? We're not giving them any funding?
This is talking about the NSECD program. And which page are you looking on?
I'm on page 27.
Page 27.
It says amount and funding period 0. So I'm just trying to figure out, when we focus on early childhood education.
Did you say 26, Ms. Hill?
27?
27, which item number?
1?
Oh, you're talking about the 0.
Yeah. So we're not, no funding is being
I think this is
allocated?
just a timing issue, right? This is just
Somebody help me.
it's just a timing question, because this only covers a couple of months, right? Beth, why don't you come up here and you can explain? As she's coming up, the NSECD program, which is, for those not aware, is the private school program for early childhood. That program is fully funded, but Beth, what's the situation?
This is simply, if you look at your backup for the allocation, it just explains that one entity was exchanged for another, so the net effect is 0. And so, therefore, we're just indicating on the backup sheets, I don't know what the page is, you'll just see that one entity was exited from the program and another entity was substituted for that same amount of money.
Okay, so the program that we substituted this program for, does it focus on early childhood education?
Yes, it is.
Is it the Early Childhood Community Network and Tech Pilot? Is that the funding? I'm looking at the backup, so I'm trying to get an understanding here.
It's a non-public.
Ms. Ciano, if you could get a little closer to the mic, please. Thank you.
Right, it's on page 36 of your packet. And it just explains that Briarfield Academy decided they were not exited from the program. And so substituting for that same amount of money is Little Union Learning Center. They now have the cash, so it didn't actually result in any additional allocation of funds. Instead, it was just a movement of the allocation from one entity to the next.
Okay.
So, Ms. Ciano, then, so what you're saying is, initially, Briarfield was approved for the allocation, they backed out, and then the money went to Little Union Learning Center?
Yes, correct.
And what was the process? How was that determined? Was it competitive and Little Union was second in the lineup?
I believe they probably were next on the list to participate in the program, because the way you get the funds is you do have to, there's a competitive process.
There's a grant process by which approved non-public schools and providers of early childhood apply to the state. It's a competitive grant, and we are not funding every slot through this process. This is a grant that came over from the governor's office to the Department of Education last year. It funds private schools for early childhood.
Any further discussion on this item?
I'll get with Ms. Beth for more clarification, because this is...
Ms. Hill, are you asking for more clarification now?
Oh, no, I'll get with her.
You okay? Okay.
I did want to know about, and I don't have it right in front of me here, but it's part of the Believe and Succeed, and it's the leadership development programs. So I'd like to know who to talk to about which national programs they're going to be involved in, just because I have an interest in leadership development.
Sure. And there are both local and national programs involved. Columbia University operates out of New Orleans, so that's one program they operate at Tulane. Secondly, Leading Educators, which is also out of New Orleans, is involved in this. The Rapides Foundation is providing additional funding through the Orchard Foundation to 3 parishes in central Louisiana. They are working with the University of Washington, as well as with another professional development group. So I think probably David Shepard is the person to talk to, and David's in the back there.
Okay.
I'll have David reach out to you. Yeah.
Any other board discussion on this item? We have a couple of comment cards. Ms. Berrios. Chris Meyer. Chris Meyer?
No, he's not here.
Okay. Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 54, item 4.3, consideration of LDE contracts and leases of $50,000 and over.
Do I have a motion to approve?
A motion that we approve.
Ms. Bope, thank you. Do I have a second? Ms. Bradford? Any discussion from the board on this item? Page 54. Ms. Berrios? Okay. Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 61, item 4.4, consideration of special schools district budget. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive? Ms. Bradford?
Second.
Ms. Bope, thank you. Any discussion on this item? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 63, item 5.1, consideration of the 2013-14 budget for the Recovery School District. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ms. Bope? Mr. Romer? Any discussion from the board on this item?
Members, I would just add that this is, with the exception of about $9 million in capital monies that have been adjusted as part of an interagency transfer, this is the same budget that you saw at the last meeting, at the June meeting, and we then deferred discussion until this meeting.
Ms. Berrios, you have a comment card? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Romer?
Is it possible for, by tomorrow to actually, I see it in the backup. If I have a question, I'll bring it up tomorrow. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Mr. Feeney?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak again, to express my concerns about the so-called Recovery School District and its effect on the Baton Rouge Parish school system. $340 million fully described in 8 pages? I don't think so. When I asked about that 2 months ago, I was assured when this came back before the board in August, there would be more details. There are not more details. This book I have in my hand describes how the East Baton Rouge Parish school system proposes to spend the same order of magnitude of money, $422 million. They start to fully describe what they're going to do with the money in approximately 300 pages. 8 pages are woefully inadequate. Furthermore, if I have more questions about the way the local school district is spending money, I am successful in my public information requests. I have a file with the salaries of every current employee in the East Baton Rouge Parish school system. I have asked for such data repeatedly for the Recovery School District and been stonewalled at every turn. It shouldn't be necessary for the public to sue the Department of Education in order to get details about how the tax money that's being taken from the local system and put behind several firewalls is actually being spent. I'm concerned about middle schools that don't offer Carnegie unit earning credit, as was the case with the schools I visited when the Recovery School District was having their community meetings recently. I'm concerned about high schools that don't offer a robust opportunity to earn college credit. Using course choice as the only fallback for that is not an adequate response. I'm concerned about schools with no music programs, like Glen Oaks Middle, for example. I'm concerned with the athletic field and the auditorium building at Glen Oaks Middle being left to decay while that facility is controlled and underused by the Recovery School District. But mostly, I'm concerned about what appears to be an intentional lack of transparency, accountability, or responsible use of the public's money to further public education. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Finney, of whom did you make your request for information on the
Patrick Dobard, Zoe Reed, Barry Landry, at least.
I will follow up with them, and we'll make sure that
I
you
would
get the
appreciate
information.
that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question as well, not for
Mr.
not for
Romer.
the speaker, but
Mhm.
of the budget that's presented to us, does this include the flow-through to the charter schools?
No. Those
Okay.
funds go directly to the
They go
charter
directly
schools.
to, so that's not
Yes.
accounted
No.
in here. And we get a separate budget, if I'm correct, presented to us by those.
From each board.
From each
Yes,
board.
yes.
Okay. I may have additional questions tomorrow, so for now, I'm finished. Thank you.
Dr. Beebe?
Yes, I wanted to know, and I agree with the gentleman who just spoke. For example, utility cost and what have you, like the breakdown. Can we be provided that information, like per school? Because, you know, I have had individuals communicate some significant monthly cost relating to utilities, and would like to have a breakdown.
Dr. B, I think we can get you any of that detail you'd like to have. What would be the appropriate, Superintendent Dobar? Is this something you'd like to have in a meeting, or can we provide that as a subsequent?
No, you can provide
we
it.
can-
I would just like to have
Yes,
like a
ma'am.
listing of your schools and the expenditures associated with each.
Mr. Chairman, Patrick Dobar, Superintendent, Recovery School District. Ms. Beebe, yes, we can, Dr. Beebe, we can get you that. Because that's actually something that we've been looking at, particularly in one of the schools outside of New Orleans. That's a very large facility. But even before we took it, the way it was structured, there's only like one HVAC system with one switch. So even for that district, when they had it, they were like spending money that almost unnecessarily. Where we're looking into solutions such as like paying for a switch to be able to control various buildings and save the state money. And so, yes, ma'am, I'd be happy to give that to you, and any suggestions you might have on how we can like lower those costs, I'm definitely open to
I'd
it.
like to have a
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on this item? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 71, item 5.2, consideration of RST contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. The recommendation is to approve, but I need to note that on page 84, the contract on that page is under $50,000, and it was mistakenly entered into this item instead of the previous item, so that item will need, that particular contract will need to be received instead of approved.
So we need to take those separately then.
Yeah.
Okay, so I need a motion to approve all items except for the Macmillan First Steps Community Development Corps. Is that correct? Okay. Do I have a, Mr. Wagasback, do I have a second? Ms. Bradford? Any discussion on that item?
So for the Macmillan's First Step, we're pulling it, but have they been paid for the services, or are we going to give them?
Let's cover that in a minute. It's outside of the, what's
Okay,
on the
okay.
floor right now.
Okay.
We'll talk about that one in a minute.
Okay. Well, I have another question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, for example, I know I've had the opportunity to go visit La Place, and I'm quite sure the board remembers last year there was so much controversial around La Scie Francais. And I see that we're going to allocate $82,000 to the program for the LA4 program. No one have never, the board, LDOE has not reported back to us to tell us what was the findings with some of the allegations that were made to La Scie Francais. And now here we are allocating $82,000. So I need some clarity on La Scie Francais and those allegations, were they investigated? If so, we never received a report on it. And another concern that I have, because they are going to be doing an LA4 program, which they'll be servicing children that will be eligible for LA4, are these eligible pre-K students and their parents meet the guidelines? Because that was one of the concerns, that they had students there stating that they were taking from Macmillan and then coming to La Scie Francais. And when I visited the school, I didn't see that makeup there at all. So I need some clarity or some information on La Scie Francais, on the investigation that you guys said you were going to conduct. Anybody's here?
I don't know about an investigation. We did spend quite a lot of time at the school, per your suggestion. And I can assure you that all of the students who are in the LA4 program, which is what this is, that's what this is for,
correct,
meet the guidelines of the LA4 program. And over the last 6 months, we've worked to identify a new CEO, and we have turned over the board of that school entirely, so that we now have appropriate governance and appropriate management of that school. And I think it's going in the right direction, and I hope that that's the experience the parents and the kids are having as well.
Dr. Beebe?
Yes, on page 82, there is a contract for $97.5 thousand. Again, going back to prior contracts, it might have been the new teacher project, but leadership development, providing support for teachers. What on this particular contract? How many teachers are impacted? Is it entire RSD, or do we have select schools that we target? I know it says high needs, but it would appear that most of the majority of the schools in the RSD would be viewed to be high risk or high need. So I'm just concerned that every board meeting we're asked to approve a contract that relates to some teacher development, leadership development, and eventually the dollar amount adds up. So Superintendent White?
It's a fair concern. I think most school systems have professional development opportunities for their principals and their teachers, and that's really what this is. This is an opportunity to develop the leadership capacity of teachers in every direct run school within the Recovery School District. So obviously that's quite a lot of teachers. I don't know how many off the top of my head. This is a New Orleans-based organization that's providing professional development, therefore, to teachers in New Orleans, to teachers in Baton Rouge, and teachers in St. Helena, teachers in Point Coupee, to build the leadership capacity so they can facilitate teacher collaboration within their school buildings.
But oftentimes within traditional districts, we are responsible for developing that. For example, many school systems have taken the initiative to implement teacher induction programs. And once again, my concern is not for, per se, the teacher development. I support that. But it's just the amount of money being spent every board meeting, and some in many instances it's high dollar. This is not really, although $97,000 to some would be considered a lot, but it's just like the concern is we are constantly pouring money into, like I said, the training, whereas when do we build capacity? You often say that we need to develop capacity so that we're not always we're confined to a certain budget, and from there we get teachers within the district without having to pay outside consultants. Because I will be the first to say that we have many teacher leaders, and some districts may feel compelled to get outside resources when the talent is within the district. These teachers know the culture, they understand the students, they provide that professional learning and support for their colleagues. And I just, I understand, it's tax dollars, but I think we could, we could be more effective at expending these dollars. And, it's just so easy, because I have different department heads within the district. They'll come to me and say, well, we really could use another teacher aide at this school. But, you have to operate, you have to live within your means. So we can't just continue to spend money. We need to tap the talent, the leadership that we have within the district, and have them put forth the effort rather than contracting with firms. So I wish you would look into this.
Will do. Thank you.
Any further discussion on this item? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Oh, I'm sorry, we do have a comment card. Ms. Berrios? On 5.3? Okay. Motion carries. Now, the item that the Macmillan, what do we do with it? We need a motion to receive it. Okay, that's on page, what page? 84. So I need a motion to receive the Macmillan First Steps Community Development Corporation item.
So moved.
Ms. Jones, do I have a second? Ms. Bradford? Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question. Why did we make the decision, I don't know if it's based on number of students, that we're going to allocate Macmillan 41,000? I'm trying to get to my page.
Ms. Hill, if you could speak into the microphone,
Okay, I'm sorry.
please.
For Macmillan First Steps Community Development Corporation, I don't know how we derived to the amount, but is it that, however, why are we allocating $41,000? Is it per student? Or is how many students they have in there? Or how does that work? This funding, how does the process? How do we determine we're going to give this school 41,000, we're going to give this school 82, we're going to give this school 87? I'm just trying to figure. Can somebody explain that to me?
Yeah, this is a half class at Macmillan. You'll see that the amounts are divided up in increments of 41,220. That's a half class at Macmillan. You'll see right across from it, Morris Jeff. They've got two classes, 4 times that half class.
Okay.
So it's just you're right, Ms. Hill. It's just a by student, just by students.
So for a half class, how many students?
10 students.
Okay, 10 students. Okay, so for 10 students, you receive 41,000.
Yes, ma'am.
In every. Okay. That's interesting. Okay.
Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 87, item 5.3, consideration of the creation of a public benefit corporation on behalf of the Recovery School District. The recommendation is to authorize the additional info submitted by the RSD.
Okay, I'm gonna request a motion and ask the superintendent if he would to give an overview of this item. So do I have a motion to authorize the corporation? Mr. Garvey, do I have a second? Mr. Romer. Superintendent White.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Members, the RSD, as you know, is our lead team on implementing a facilities plan to rebuild the school system after Katrina. The area of the city that is the largest, most heavily devastated and at the risk of being overcrowded in the city is New Orleans East, as you know, for those of you who spend time there. And one way of rebuilding school capacity in areas where the school buildings were destroyed, and I think that's really what we're talking about here, is where buildings were destroyed, is to use old blighted facilities, some of which may have been schools, some of which may not have been, to build them into schools and to renovate them to become schools. This is an old Bell South building. It's a blighted building in this community. It's very well known to those of you who spend time there. It's thus an eyesore and a community development issue. At the same time, it could be a school because we need more schools there. This is a proposal to create a corporation, essentially a board, that would be able to acquire this property and to build a school in this building as part of the master plan. It wouldn't be funded with FEMA dollars. It would be funded with community development block grant funds, which the state has provided to the RSD in rebuilding the schools, and it represents a great opportunity to achieve better economic development in New Orleans East, as well as a new school. It's been supported by the state senator there. It's been supported by the councilman there. We have letters of support for creating it, and we ask your support of it.
Any discussion from the board?
I have major concerns with this project. When you look at the individuals that will be serving on this particular board, it would just be Superintendent of Education, which would be John White, Superintendent of Recovery School District, Dobar, and the President of BESE. And my major concern with issues like this, just like as of earlier, is that we give all this autonomy to Superintendent White, and when issues arise and we make motions or things are not accurate, then nothing can be done. But as a board, I know we can override that. That's law. I know that because we govern him. But my concern with this would be, what would be a purpose of a BESE board if we're going to give all our rights to the superintendent and to the president of the board? And to me, it makes no sense to even have a board if we're going to keep giving all our responsibility to individuals that have to report to us. Could someone help me understand that?
Well, I think you'd have to ask other board members, but I'll just share my 2 cents. In this case, you have charged me with implementing a facilities master plan. Through this construct, you continue to have complete oversight of me, of Superintendent Dobard, and include additional oversight now because there is actually a BESE member on the board. I suppose you could debate which BESE member should be on the board, but the president, I think, provides the highest level of accountability. So I would actually suggest this adds to accountability while at the same time maintaining BESE's direct control over what it is that I do in implementing the master plan.
Well, I guess my question would be to the board president. Why wasn't any other BESE members invited to participate on this committee?
I don't object to other, am I in order?
Go ahead, Mr. Rowan.
I don't object to, who the member is, or, this is an instrument designed for a very specific purpose. The superintendent thought it appropriate to have a BESE member on there. I suppose we could mandate that reports be made to our full board, which is certainly not a problem. I'm not in, the details of the operations, totally open to other suggestions of how to do it. This just seemed like a way to make sure we had representation at the same time that they were able. It's primarily for the purposes of a very specific piece of property, and that piece of property has to have an entity that can legally manage the acquisition of it, basically, or the development of it. But I'm open if we want to consider a different structure. I'm totally open to that.
Okay.
There's no magic formula here to this particular.
So would I need to put in the form of a motion to reconsider the individuals that will serve on this committee, and if you want to be appointed, do I need to make that in a motion form?
Before you do that, Ms.
Okay,
Taylor,
okay.
discuss it.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Rowan. You finished?
Dr. Beebe?
Okay. I'm trying to understand, I understand this is law. It was created through law. Am I correct? Statute? It says the Public School Facilities Financing Act authorizes, but it doesn't, are we, as BESE, compelled to abdicate our responsibilities to the taxpayers? I know this is specific to the RSD, but I share Ms. Hill's concern in that we're giving too much autonomy to 3 people. Now, why could we not continue to operate as a full board when making decisions? And I understand you alluded to site acquisition and what have you. I just feel we're relinquishing our responsibility to Louisiana taxpayers. And we just finished an item talking about contracts, and some were approved, by some time ago. We were just, I guess, ratifying in a sense. I'm not comfortable with relinquishing my responsibility to my district and to, I'd say I represent the state. And
Well, Dr. Beebe, I think it's a pretty normal process to have boards, have members of a board represent themselves in different entities and report back to the board. In this particular case, I would not see it prudent to have the total BESE board as a member of this item. Now, if we want to select some other BESE members to be on it and so forth, that's certainly, we can certainly discuss that. But I think what's been presented is a normal, prudent way to appoint individuals to be responsible and report back to the total board for approval.
But this is giving too much responsibility to a few key people, and I know for a fact Ms. Hill and I won't be in the equation, and that's the concern I have.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I agree. I think that this is a pretty standard way of doing the operating of a board. I think that the reason those two individuals seem to have undue power is because of their positions. They are the superintendent and the president of this board. And I think it may be a trust issue.
It is.
But as a matter of fact, those are the two individuals who would be most responsible to being on this board. But I don't have, on this committee, or whatever the correct term is. At the same time, I think that should we want to include another member, I don't think that is out of order either. Is it, Superintendent?
Well, I think the question is more one of just, this is a, and look, I'm no expert. Many of you, Mr. Romer, Mr. Gio, are more in this line of work than I am. But it strikes me from my experience in the master plan that this being a transactional thing involving a real estate transaction, it requires a lot of time quickly in the details, and we have to be very nimble. It can't be, the kind of more sort of regimented process that a board like this. So I defer to the board. It's totally a creation of the board, but I do want to caution. I think it's time intensive, and I think it has to be nimble.
And I'm sorry.
Okay, Mr. Garvey and then Ms. Beaufort.
Yeah, I would like some clarification if possible. What part of the purchasing of this particular property is it? What activity in the purchasing is it that Ms. Beebe does not want to delegate? Is it the seeking of appraisals?
The entire?
Or is it the signing of the check that would pay for the property once it's purchased? What activity would it be?
Entering into the agreements, because we kind of know how
I'm sorry, what
things
agreement?
Excuse me?
Dr. Beebe, if you could speak into the microphone, please.
I said, well, you'd have to be blind not to see what has been happening the last couple of years. And
I don't think we've purchased the property at all in the last couple of years.
Well,
This would be the
Mr.
first
Garvey-
property we've ever purchased.
But, Mr. Garvey, I'm
Yes, ma'am.
talking about committees and, representation, and it's always, and I can appreciate some being in the leadership role by the mere fact 9 to 2, and, it's not like
Dr.
it's
Beebe,
all about me.
if we could stay on the item, I'd appreciate it.
Well, he asked me a question, I'm responding.
Right, and this is the
It's
purchase.
a trust issue, Mr. Garvey.
I'm
Put it
sorry.
on the table. It's a trust issue. I
Mm.
mean, we're representing people throughout the state, even within the RSD. There are people within the RSD who challenge some of the decisions made by this body. And I am of the position that we have identified 3 people to represent BESE, and then they're going to go out and seek property or, it says to plan, renovate, construct, lease, sublease, manage, and improve schools and school property. So they make the decision, it comes back to BESE, rubber stamp. That's my point, Mr.
So
Gordon.
you
It's
don't.
a trust issue.
You don't trust them to renovate this property? Is that?
Look, I told you, I've stated my position. Take the vote, 9 to 2. I'm willing to bet.
Ms. Beaufort? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Garvey, you
Yeah,
finished?
no, I still have a lot of questions, but I guess I might as well withdraw them.
One second, Ms. Beaufort.
Well, being that it's Ms. Orange Jones's district, I'll let her go first.
I just wanted to clarification on this particular issue, and it is following up a bit from Mr. Garvey. What aspects of the actual agreement, would you be in question, what are you questioning in terms of the process moving forward? What specific concerns would there be to something like this? When I think about what this could mean for this particular community, what it could mean for this community of children, it feels fairly straightforward from my perspective. I'm trying to understand where in the process is the trust, the mistrust coming from.
Well, I think, Ms. Jones, you know, and I know, working in New Orleans, that the community in New Orleans do not trust RSD. Neither do they trust RSD in New Orleans. They don't trust RSD in EBR in my own district. For example, with the master plan piece, here we have a committee of a master plan, individuals that are appointed to the committee, and as a board, we have yet to receive the master plan in reference to the merger of Old Perry Walker and Landry and so forth. I mean, and you continue on. And so my
Ms.
concern.
Hill, please get to the point.
Okay, well, my concern is, number one, we're not transparent. That's first and foremost. We don't have the RSD, don't have the trust of the community. And I think that to sit here and say, well, we're going to give our responsibility to 3 individuals, that, hey, comes back to the board, the vote's going to be 9-2. And so my issue is trust and being transparent to the community and making sure that things are up front.
Ms. Bofi?
Yes, the lower ninth ward.
And if I may, because the question was posed, okay? I
I
visited the
I
lower.
thought Ms. Hill answered it for you.
No,
Okay.
I can answer for myself.
Okay.
I visited the lower ninth ward. The parents, there's a subdivision. Desire. There were hundreds of children in the area, and they're being bused long distances. These people, these parents appealed to Ms. Hill and me, because we took the time to visit them, to say, we need property near our communities. We don't want our children on buses getting dressed and ready to catch the bus to get on the bus at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. So when we talk about site acquisition and the representation that you're asking for, are we going to have the public's interest at heart? That's my question, and that's my opposition.
But there's no decision to be made about the site. They've identified the site. So you can't
This gives you
mistrust a decision that's spelled out right here in the packet.
What? Tell me, which site are you referring to?
The Bell
It says
South
here,
building site.
As I understand, it gives autonomy. This is on this particular item, but if we create.
But that's what we're talking about, is this particular item.
It's one particular site.
So what about future sites?
Well, that would be a different motion and a different issue.
Let's take the board, if I could. I know, Ms. Bofi, you'd like to speak. I'm going to adhere and give to the board president. He has something to say. Mr. Romer?
I'm really, no good deed goes unpunished. I know I was looking for more responsibilities and more to do. I really could care less. If Ms. Beebe wants to serve on this board with me, it makes no difference. It makes no difference in the world to me. If another board member wants, but that's up to this board to decide. I can care less. So, I think this is a specific item. If y'all want to manage it differently, manage it differently. I didn't go looking for a fight on this issue. We have a need to serve kids that could be served in this particular area of this community. Their local state legislators have written us a letter saying they want it done. We've agreed that it ought to be done. We need to come up with a way to facilitate it. I don't care who's on it. Y'all can all be a member.
No.
It makes no difference to me.
Thank you, Mr. Romer. Ms. Bofi? Are you finished?
I'm real close to finish.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bofi?
Well, I wanted to thank Mr. Roma for his willingness to be on it. This is outside of my own professional expertise, and I prefer not to be involved in this situation. And with Mr. Romer's background, I think that it is something that he has the qualifications to do, that he can do a great job representing the board on it. I would be willing to support other board members who would also be willing to give even more time to this important work that we do. And so if that's the case and somebody is just looking to be part of this, then I'd be happy to support them if they are.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call the question unless there's 3 guessing members that object.
Well, we have some comment cards, and I'm going to go ahead and allow them to speak. Ms. Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to second Ms. Bophy's point. I too feel this is outside of my personal expertise. Therefore, although I have a vested stake, obviously, in this issue in my district and am in full support of it, I am open to a process across the board that would give other board members the opportunity to be involved.
Thank you. Ms. Barrios, would you like to speak?
Mr. Gorham, I just need clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
Because perhaps my confusion stems from the fact that I'm being asked to consider the creation of a public benefit corporation. I don't see the site. It's just the creation of a public benefit corporation. That is my objection. That, in other words, that we're relinquishing the total responsibility to this group. For as I understand, this would be indefinite. Then they would make all decisions regarding any site acquisition, any construction, any leasing, subleasing, all of the above. So,
Ms. Beebe, if you, this exec direct was handed out to us just as we started consideration of the agenda item.
now whose fault is that?
I'm sorry.
I said, whose fault is this?
I'm not here to blame fault. It's just this.
I'm just trying to point out to you where you can find more information on the item.
It is a specific site.
We just found it out just now.
Well, so I understand that.
I'm responding from what is in my book.
We realize that, but it is a specific site, just to clarify the record.
If you read at the bottom of the page, it says that when backup will be submitted to us. Backup materials providing additional information will be uploaded to Board Docs by August 7th.
Today is not August 7th. It's past.
It was uploaded then. So are we cleared? It's a single site.
Thank you for giving us that.
Yeah. Ms. Barrios?
Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. First of all, my guess is that maybe aside from Mr. Garvey, who's an attorney and deals extensively with business entities in Jefferson Parish, among others, I'm sure, it's probably safe to say that nobody on this committee has expertise in the area of public benefit corporations. That's probably true. And particularly the activities that evidently this PBC would enter into. First of all. Secondly,
I will say this, I've developed $2 billion in real estate. I mean, that's generally what this is. So, just so you'll know, you don't know what I do for a living, that's fine.
I don't.
And I don't want to be on this by myself. I hope everybody else wants to jump in the water with me. It's nice and warm, it's great. Everybody should jump in this pool.
But aside from that, expertise or no expertise, my comment focuses on the fact that, first of all, I think you're referring to as a committee, and I don't have extensive expertise either in PBCs, but my understanding that it is a public corporation chartered by the state is not the same as a committee that has authority to make decisions. Is that correct, Mr. Garvey? But it's designed to perform some public service. It would seem, my question is, first of all, it would seem that appointing members of the board or for BESE to appoint people so closely directed with the organization or the Department of Ed or the Board of Ed, their own people, kind of subverts the purpose of appointing a public benefit corporation, a separate entity. And the authority that would be concentrated by BESE into this corporation, which is what you're doing. You're turning over authority, which you have as the supervising board for the RSD, to 3 people, is pretty extensive. To authorize and empower to take all further actions, execute and deliver all further agreements, instruments, certificates, documents, to create and establish the PBC, fund the PBC, carry out the PBC's purposes, included but not limited to the acquisition and development of property, leasing of school facilities, and transfer of property and school facilities. It just doesn't seem like it's appropriate for anybody on the BESE board or the superintendent to be a member of this PBC. So I just wanted to point that out and ask you to consider that.
Thank you, Ms. Barrios. Dr. Finney?
Thank you. Without speaking to the merits or lack thereof of any particular site in New Orleans, which I'm not very familiar with, I'm a little baffled as to why you would need to create a separate legal corporation simply to own property. If the purpose of the Recovery School District is the recovery of public education in Orleans Parish in this particular instance, why would not the Orleans Parish School Board be the appropriate owner for that property? Or if for some reason that won't work, the state can own property. I just don't see the point. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, we have a motion on the floor, and we've had quite lengthy discussion on the board members that would be represented on this corporation. Is there any?
I'd like to amend the motion.
Okay.
Make a substitute motion.
Okay.
I'd like to add Ms. Beebe to serve with me.
Okay, so there's we have a substitute motion to add Ms. Beebe as part of the membership of the corporation. Do I have a second to that? Second. Okay, second by Mr. Wagisback. Any discussion?
I have a discussion.
What is that, Ms. Hill?
I mean, I have something to say.
Okay, well, go ahead.
For me, when you look at this, the PBC program, committee, I feel like this. This is New Orleans. Why didn't we reach out to the Orleans Parish School Board and ask someone to represent from Orleans Parish? They know their district better than I do. I understand Ms. Jones said this is out of her scope in reference to this committee, but why didn't we consider a community leader in that community on the board? Why didn't we consider an OPSB board representative on that board? So these are some of my concerns, because this is their community, this is their district. They know it better than we do. So those are some of the things that we should look at. Okay, adding Ms. Beebe. Ms. Beebe represents St. Martin. Not saying that that's what she's limited to, but the people that's in New Orleans, that is their community. They live there every day. And so I think as a board, we should take that in consideration and say, hey, let's add a member or nominate someone from OPSB. Let's add a member or nominate someone from out of the community. Let's add a parent to this particular group so they can be engaged.
I want to just lend some context on this. First of all, just as a matter, and I'm saying this in support of the concept that Ms. Hill raises, the legislative delegation and the city council that is elected to represent this district, as well as I sense from some of the comments of the elected member here, are supportive of the project and our approach to it. We have letters that validate their support on that. I can't speak, having been myself involved in this area, and I've worked with Superintendent Dobart every day, to the gravity of this situation. And maybe I didn't explain this well enough. Ms. Beebe, you said it, Dr. Beebe, you said it very well yourself. This community was devastated. These kids have been in trailers. We have money that is going to expire in October, and I should have said that. This is community development block grants. I completely concur with the desire for transparency, and I appreciate very much, Dr. Beebe, your volunteering to be on the committee.
I didn't volunteer.
Well, your desire to have input in the process. Don't back down now.
No.
But I will say this: we cannot, mess with this process insofar as hemming and hawing. For these kids, someone needs to move. The community leadership is very supportive of this approach, and we have to move. Also, if you've been to this community, the development of a hospital is coming on board. There's business moving back to this community. Things are really turning around. We want to be a part of that, and acquiring this facility will help the community as a whole. So I urge you to in whatever we do, to move quickly and help make this a reality.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lee?
I don't see why this is such a big deal. It's a legal issue for one site just to take care of this particular item. I don't see the need to add other members of the board. I don't see any need to do anything other than just approve the recommendation.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Lee. Let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and vote on the substitute motion, which is to add Dr. Beebe as a member of the corporation. We have a second to it. Is there any objection to that motion?
Can I ask a question before we vote?
Yes.
Dr. Beebe, do you want to be on it? Because you had said you weren't sure. Do you want to be on it?
Well, as long as I will be a voice for those within the RSD. There are many parents with concerns. I didn't raise objection because I wanted to be on the committee. And I do agree with Ms. Hill. I think we would be better served to have an objective body for a person from the RSD to be on the committee, but if we can't agree to that, I will serve to at least have representation and a voice for those individuals.
Thank you for that clarification. Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 115, item 7.1, consideration of the BESE budget. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a recommendation to receive? Mr. Wagisback? Is there a second? Ms. Bradford? Any discussion on this item? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 117, item 8.1, consideration of a report in response to HCR 153 of the 2013 regular legislative session of the Louisiana legislature. The recommendation is to approve.
Do we have a motion to approve? Ms. Bradford, a second?
I think this is an item Ms. Beebe
Yes.
had wanted to speak on.
Do I have a second?
Oh, I'll make a second.
Mr. Romer? Okay, open it up for discussion.
You ready for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Dr.
no,
Beebe.
I did want to speak to the LVC, which is, as we know, the thing of the past. And so why did we move away from LVC, the Louisiana Virtual School?
You mean LVS?
I'm sorry, LVS, from the Louisiana Virtual School. And there was greater participation at the virtual school. With now course choice, don't we service about 2,000?
I think some of the facts might be a little bit off here. One, first of all, LVS was a great pilot start, no doubt about it. However, there are several differences between LVS and where we currently are. Number one, LVS lacked accountability. The vendor got paid their full amount, irrespective of whether the kid finished the course, and there's no academic accountability to the board. So there's no report that had to be made about a specific provider of services. Number two, LVS was a relatively limited number of providers. Oftentimes you only had one provider of courses. It's a great start, but wasn't as diverse. Number three, LVS is entirely online. Course choice is part in-person and part blended, half in-person, half online. There are some online providers, but much of it is in-person courses. For those reasons, we shifted toward the course choice platform. And what you saw in response is districts like yours, St. Martin, really stepping up and innovating and providing your own virtual course. I know you don't do a course choice program, but you do a great virtual school, and as do others. I saw Jerome Pio is here. He really led an entire statewide initiative. I congratulate him for innovation in online work. So I think that people are adopting the online work as something that's done across districts. It's really this blend of in-person and online that Course Choice is trying to achieve. Also, Course Choice doesn't charge anything to districts. Districts did have to pay for LVS.
Any further discussion on this item? Mr. Lee?
I'm of the impression that LVS has really done a good job over the years. And they've been very receptive to whatever the needs of local school systems are. And I guess my question would be, is this going to be as economical as what it has been up to this point?
I think it is. I think it's more economical, actually, because LVS had a $150 fee per course to each school system, and that doesn't exist any longer in the course choice system. Plus, there's a greater diversity of providers. Mr. Lee, you may have an Algebra 1 course now where we have eight different options for a school system. So I think it'll prove to be very economical.
Where will the funds be provided for this?
In the future?
Pardon me? For the
Course choice?
Yes. Well, it'll be the 8G money and whatever else.
No, I think we need to look for a more sustainable source of funding. I would agree with the way you're describing.
I guess my question is, if LVS was provided the funding, that will be provided through course choice, could they expand their services to provide at no cost, just like the proposal is?
Well, the vendor, LVS was an organization of different vendors that provided courses to students and school systems. Course Choice has that and more. So I think you're right that the good parts of LVS have been sustained. Students can go online on the Course Choice and can register, and they'll experience no difference from what they would have under LVS. No difference at all.
How many students were in LVS?
I believe we had 5,000 total. A lot of those students are taking courses in Course Choice. Some will be taking courses through their district. I would imagine Course Choice, when all is said and done, will have roughly that amount. But I also know that there are in-person courses that are provided and blended courses, some online, some in person. So we're seeing even more innovation.
Okay.
Mr. Romer?
Walter, Mr. Lee, I think you bring up, it's a long-term question that we're going to have to tackle, whether it's legislatively or through the BESE board. How and to what extent are Course Choice options paid for? Because it's a valuable tool for districts to utilize it now. I think many of the career training options that we're starting to see are wanting to use Course Choice as their vehicle to prepare our students better for careers rather than going, if they choose not to go to a 4-year college or even a 2-year college. There's broad implications that we've not yet answered. We had a particular funding mechanism in place, but the legislature did not agree with that, the specifics of that. So we're having to go back and reconsider that. And also, I think there is a lesson right now that we're all learning that actually a lot of districts did rely on the availability of these courses more so than most people realize. So, I think we're at a good point. I actually like there being multiple providers because there's multiple services that need to be provided. But we are going to need as a state to not only this, but other educational options that we want all of our students to have, and most districts want their students to have. How are we going to make sure they're provided? And we don't have that answer yet today. We know how we're going to get through the next 12 months, but I hate to think that right now that's really the extent that we have a lot of work to do between now and this time next year to make sure this is a quality program and one that can be afforded by our students in this state. So I appreciate your comments.
I just know that LVS is provided by a state agency, and I just hate to see that cut out.
Well, I don't think anything is being cut out, and I think you're going to experience, I know we're experiencing exactly what LVS had, but then an expansion, and I'd say there's an expansion in 3 ways. Number one, same courses that LVS had, but more providers of those courses.
Well, but school systems are not going to choose it. They have to pay $150 a course.
Actually, LVS is where they had to pay $150. On the new version, they don't have to pay it.
I understand. That's why we are effectively eliminating a state agency that's providing the services.
I don't think anything's been eliminated, and I totally, of course, respect Mr. Lee, your experience, and I'm having a hard time seeing what's being eliminated.
If they're having to pay $150 a course now,
which they're not. That's the way it used to be. That's not. No one has to pay anything.
But I just can't imagine them being able to compete. Maybe they will.
Ms. Bofi?
So, based on Mr. Lee's questions, I'm a little confused. My thought was that we didn't have students who were enrolled in LVS and that was funded through AG. Am I wrong?
There is no Louisiana virtual school anymore. That's been replaced by an enhanced program called Course Choice.
And when there was one, it was funded through AG, is that correct?
Yes.
And then also there was a part that the district or the students had to pay?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Roman?
just for some clarity, and there's a little bit of confusion about what was LVS. And I don't want to belabor this point too much, but my own kids utilized what we call LVS previously for foreign language, and which is actually was through the Louisiana School of Math, Arts, and Sciences out in Natchitoches. Although it had the label of LVS, it was Louisiana School that was the provider. And this year, though there's no official LVS in existence, our provider, we're doing it again, is the Louisiana Math School in Natchitoches. So it's a little confusing that labels have changed, but my provider is the same as it's always been. Now, I'm not a school system, so I pay for the use of that. But school systems under this particular don't pay the $150 fee that they paid previously.
And there's greater access to wider things. I'll tell you, having been outside Louisiana was a pioneer in this area, and Mr. Lee is right. The virtual school was a tremendous step forward, and I think you've seen a couple of really fantastic innovations coming off it. Number one, course choice includes accountability. We're really one of the first states, really I think the first state, to fully authorize courses at the board level, so that if we have low-performing courses, they're out. Number two, we include in-person courses. We're the first state in the country to actually have a course choice program of in-person courses. So ABC teaching construction engineering, Cyber Innovation Center teaching cyber anti-terrorism preparation, Acadian ambulance teaching career education. So those kinds of courses. But third, to Mr. Lee's point and to your point, Mr. Romer, we're sustaining the good pieces of an online system, except that rather than just having to choose from one provider, you can choose from 6, 7, 8 providers. I guess I know Wayne will talk about the editorial he wrote in the Advocate about this. I think that's a good thing. We're expanding choice, but we're maintaining accountability. It's not an insult to LVS, it's a compliment. In fact, the people who are running course choice are the same people who ran the LVS system. They're some of our best staff. Ken Bradford is here, and I think it's exciting progress, if anything else. Mr. Romer?
I'm not promising much. I will say this, it was an interesting process this year and I can only speak personally, when we went to look at course choice for the option of accelerated foreign language, which is what my kids take. It was very interesting to have not one choice, but I can't remember the number, but I had between 8 and 12 choices. Now, I happen to choose the same provider I chose previously, but we went through each one and saw the pros and cons of each. So there's work to be done here, and there's room for improvement, but it's a very, very, very valuable tool for us to participate in and continue to work on, Mr. Lee.
Ms. Hill?
Yes, I guess my concern would be just listening to the conversation or the discussion is that I know the Louisiana Virtual School they had like almost 5,000 students in their program. Now with course choice, because of the funding mechanism, that we have cut that number to 2,000. So to me, it looks like the students are at a disadvantage because we done lost almost 3,000 students who was in a program that was really working for them statewide. So how is this course choice program being beneficial to our students? That's my concern.
Well, as you may recall, the state had a proposal to fund it, and the court decided that wasn't an appropriate vehicle through funding, so we had to make some changes. Now, we have a wait list. I believe we'll clear the wait list. We'll see. We're working on how we can achieve savings so that we can increase that number well above 2,000. I think we will be able to do that, but we'll see. So I think your concerns will be alleviated. But in answer to why, one, we made a switch toward there being accountability, so the board can review and can assess for academic accountability. Two, we made a switch toward in-person courses, so not all these are online. Many of them are in person, which adds an additional benefit. And three, we have more providers than ever before. So there's we think, a better program. It's a more sophisticated program. We're keeping it at roughly the same size if we clear the wait list, which should alleviate your concern. Fourth, we've got some great innovators here, like my colleagues in Vermilion, that are doing a lot of this work on their own, or Ms. Beebe, Dr. Beebe, who's doing this work on their own now in St. Martin. So school districts have seen the great work that goes on in LVS, and they're expanding it to adopt their own thing. To be honest, I know Wayne's about to get up here. I think we're making a bit of an issue out of, frankly, what is just good news. We're building on great work that Ken and his team did. We're expanding it to new and better horizons. It's less expensive. I do agree we have a challenge, Mr. Romer, in terms of figuring out how do we extend this choice to all Louisiana families, because we're not really there right now. But I don't see any negatives. There's some intonations. There's a negative going on here. I think this is good news for Louisiana families.
Any further board discussion? We have 3 comment cards. Mr. Free, I'll let you go first since you're up here.
Wayne Free, Louisiana Association of Educators. I had a presentation, but it's changed. I apologize. First of all, Walter Lee, your question a while ago, you did pay $150 for LVS. Under course choice, the district will pay anywhere between $500 and $1,200, not the $150 that it charged before. There are lots of other questions I'll be happy to answer as we go through. I'll go to my report.
Dr. Free, Mr. Free, before you go forward, could you just explain how is it that the district pays $500 to $1,200?
If a person signs for course choice, does money come out of their budget that normally would go in for that student since they're taking that course?
No.
That's not what we've been told. Who is paying that $500 to $1,200?
The state.
So it's coming out of the HG funds?
It is coming out of HG funds, correct.
Thank you.
It is not coming out of a district's budget, to be clear. And it is not
Let me ask it a different way. You have said many times at the legislature these funds are fungible. You're saying that they will still get all the money for the students and none will be taken out if that student takes a course choice course.
Correct.
That's not my understanding, but I'll let other people deal with that particular issue. 2 weeks ago, an article appeared in the Ed Week and in the Advocate as well. Essentially said the popularity of new choice course program allows students to choose virtual, face-to-face, and hybrid courses. Did an excellent job. There's a waiting list of more than 1,000 students. I read that article, and then I looked at the most popular course titles included: Algebra 1, Biology, Civics, Chemistry, Geometry, Spanish 1, Spanish 2, courses that were all offered under LVS. So I called the department and I asked the question, in the past, under LVS, how many did we deal? And the answer was last year we serviced over 5,000 students. And now I find that we can only service 1,000 students. We have a waiting list of 1,000. And my guess is we're going to have a number of others who will want to apply for virtual courses or other kinds of courses. That does not mean that I do not believe that there are value and is value in providing additional coursework, including vocational technical programs. But to send a report to the legislature that hides the fact that we have eliminated LVS and those 5,000 courses that were provided with the accountability that went to the school districts when they took that course and the engagement in the process makes no sense. And when I read this report, one of the first things I read is that the legislators said that they wanted a report including but not limited to the approval and so on of the course choice. The elimination of LVS is a critical part of the course choice process. It's where the money comes from to pay for it, and it is forcing many students to sign up for course choice who would have signed up for LVS before. That should be a part of this report on page 1. On page 7, and the rest of the report, by the way, is very effective, and it does a good job of going through it. On page 7 at the very top, the statement, the mission of Louisiana Course Choice Program is to expand access to quality course offerings to all Louisiana students. When we serviced 5,000 last year, to say we're servicing 1,000 this year is to expand it. I find that very difficult to believe. I go on through the report, and a number of other things that show up are very appropriate. The report is not inappropriate, except you're doing the same thing that you did before. You're sending a report to the legislature that doesn't take into account the full impact of eliminating LVS and doing this process as well. I asked the department when I called in to get the information.
Mr. Frey, I'd
how
ask
many of
you
the
to
people-
start wrapping up your comments, please.
How many of the people signed up last time signed up for these same courses? And again, over 80% were taking these same courses last time under LVS.
I need to stop you. That's just not true.
Well, that's what the department said. If it's not true, then tell the department.
Who said it? Did Ken say it?
I just soon not put him in that position.
Then I'll talk to you afterwards, because I
That'll be fine.
can tell you from the gentleman who runs it that the answer, that's just not true. To be honest, Wayne, you've said a lot of things that aren't true. And I'd ask that you verify your facts with me before you get up there.
I'll be
I'm not
happy
gonna
to do my very best to do that. I would ask you to do the same.
That'd be fine. That'd be fine. Thank you.
My say, I
Mr.
find
Romer?
it very interesting. The very people that fight us on expanding choice are up here arguing that we're not expanding it. It's awesome. This is a great country.
Any other comments from the board? Thank you, Mr. Free. Ms. Berrios? Dr. Finney?
Thank you. My math has maybe gotten a little rusty since I finished graduate school the last time, but I'm pretty sure 150 is less than 1,200. So the funding source might have changed, but I don't believe that it's been demonstrated that the current model is cheaper than what worked for two of my kids with Louisiana Virtual School. And I'm also trying to figure out how, if we're expanding the program, we've gone from 5,000 participants to 2,000. That doesn't seem like an expansion to me, at least the way I learn math. But I'm going to nitpick on details because I think, I like numbers. I think details matter. I'd be interested to know, and I'll state my wishes for data here publicly because I know it would be a moot point if I tried to do a public information request and get a meaningful response from your department.
I think the superintendent has earlier said he would help you with that.
And I will follow up on those two and add this third topic.
We don't need to be reminded. Thank you.
I'd be curious to know the number of students in each of these courses, the students assigned to each vendor, which are strictly virtual and which include in-person components. I'm a little concerned with the unevenness of the in-person things, because what happens if the kid in a remote part of the state really wants the course that involves an in-person component? Does the teacher actually drive 200 or 300 miles to do that? So I don't expect an answer here in my 3-minute period, but details like that matter and should be included in this kind of a report. It would be useful to know if any of the teachers are certified to teach the subject matter in Louisiana. And also whether any of the 2,000 current participants or whatever the final number ends up to be are taking multiple subjects, or if each student gets to pick one until you've got through the waiting list and then maybe they can double up after that. So I would reject this report and insist on one with more details before you submit it to the legislature.
Dr. Finney, appreciate your comments. If you had a lot of specific requests in that, so I would ask that you put that in writing if you would. You can address it to the superintendent, and I'm sure he'll get an answer for you.
All right.
Thank you. You have a call?
Sorry for the late card. I honestly didn't know I was going to be speaking on this. It's going to dovetail, I think, into this discussion we'll have a little while. But my name is Dan Garrett. I'm going to be here today as a parent whose son did take 2 classes through the LBS. I think the difficulty that people are having with converting the manner by which we provide online courses, and again, this was courses that weren't available at his high school. but he took them online very successfully, is that LVS was a public entity. LVS, as a public entity, had the oversight that goes with public entities, as well as operated without the need for a profit motive. Now, granted, they may have had to hire companies to provide services, but the entity itself didn't have a profit motive. It didn't need to make a profit. Converting to a privatized online course system.
Can you just explain? I'm having a hard time understanding the difference. Just let me make sure I understand. So there used to be an office, and that office would contract with BESE's approval with for-profit and not-for-profit providers of courses. How is that different from today?
Well, I think today the difference is that the individual course providers build in the cost for their course based upon their need, as opposed to LVS, which provided a lot of the service itself. And again, if LVS... No, actually, that's not right, Danny.
I
would ask that you let me stop.
You need to get your facts right.
Well,
These were private entities that delivered courses through platforms that they themselves had developed, some for-profit, some not-for-profit, and you're right. The LVS team
never had a
operates as a part
contract
of the
with any
government.
private company.
Yeah, that's
We
right.
never had a contract with any private company.
Right. They provided
McKinley High School did not have a contract with any private company.
And you know what? They don't under course choice either. They provide a course through the state. The state remunerates them when they do it. It's no different from when a school board pays a textbook company. They could be for-profit. They could not be. You're saying something that I don't think you really understand, and you're stating it as fact.
All right. If LVS worked so well, and I think it did. I thought my son had a great experience through LVS. Being that LVS was a private entity, y'all have ultimate control over the quality of the product that they provide.
You just said it was a public entity.
I'm sorry, public entity. Y'all have ultimate control over the product that they provide. Y'all don't have ultimate control over the product that a private course provider provides until after the fact.
Wait a minute. What's the difference in the control that the board and the department have over from LVS as opposed to course choice? What's the difference?
LVS was operated by public employees, correct?
Yes.
I mean, I know some.
Yes. And who is course choice operated by?
Private. Well, the actual providers are private providers.
As they are in LVS.
And so we had a system that was a publicly run system that was serving a significant number of students.
Mr. Garrett, would you say that even though they were private providers, just like they are now, that's what Superintendent White's saying?
Well, and I think what he's saying is, well, that ultimately you go through, it still is private providers. That's like saying that it's not a city that builds a road, it's the contractor that builds the road. But that is different from putting the contractor in charge of building the road. I think that LVS was a system that worked.
We did screen all the providers. You realize you had to be approved by this board to be a provider.
Exactly. But what I'm saying is, so what you're saying is we had this great system that the state was the pioneer on, and we've now replaced it with something that provides essentially the same service, but to less than half the number of students at a higher cost.
Danny, that's where you're wrong, and let me explain why. And maybe I haven't effectively communicated this, and I know you take your facts from me on this, so I apologize. Number one, the state did not offer in-person courses. We didn't offer in-person career courses.
But it could have.
In-person arts courses.
It could have.
We didn't offer, as part of LVS, that's Louisiana virtual school.
But it could have.
In-person courses. Secondly, this board didn't authorize any of them based on performance, and the payment went to the provider irrespective of whether the kid completed the course. Here you have accountability with money and accountability with authorizing. Third, there were only 30 course titles in LVS. Here you have hundreds of course titles. For each course title, there was only one provider in LVS. Here, in some cases, you have up to a dozen providers. So you're right. Guilty as charged. The funding was cut down. We had to change our plans. We're probably going to enroll about as many kids in course choice as we did in LVS last year. But you won't see tremendous growth. All we're trying to do is take the good platform that you said was good and trying to expand it. And I guess I'm having a hard time seeing it's still a government office.
Well, and I'll address that.
Maintaining contracts with private providers, that hasn't changed.
I'll address that. If you wanted to expand LVS, you could have expanded LVS without getting rid of it. And I think that's the question that people have, is if LVS was good, and I don't know of anybody that doesn't think it was good. The only thing that I think has changed is the manner in which it's being managed. And it seems like that if LVS was good, you could have expanded LVS to do all of the things that you proclaim you want course choice to do.
Mr. Garrett,
But you can
appreciate your
expand it
comments.
through
I need you to go
LVS.
ahead and wrap up if you would, please.
Well, again, I came prepared. I thought all I was going to do is make a comment, but I'm having to enter into a colloquy. But what I'm saying is, I think the
please go ahead and wrap up
the
if you
concern
would.
that I have heard is that for the people who have had any interaction with LVS, it was an outstanding program. And instead of expanding it and emboldening it and making it even better, it was replaced with something else on the promise that the something else is going to be better.
Thank you for your comments. Superintendent Pio? Am I getting closer to pronouncing that correctly?
Thank you. Jerome Pio, Superintendent for Million Parish School Board. Superintendent White, LVS was more than just a pilot. It was 13 years of people investing their time and their efforts to create a foundation for online learning. In fact, several statistics show that in Education Week's 2009 Technology Council, it received an A. Louisiana ranked 6th in Center for Digital Education's 2009 survey. LVS program was highlighted in Obama's administration's spring 2010 U.S. DOE release, Fostering Innovation. I can go on and on. There's several here. And what does our state do? 91% of students that took an LVS course actually performed very well and passed EOC courses. So as a state, what did we do? We shut it down. We shut down a program that showed success, not only in Louisiana, but in the United States. We led a cause, and of course, we were finally showing great things, and then we shut it down for course choice. This year, $2 million offers 2,000 students an opportunity to take an online course. That factors down to, what, $1,000 per course? We could have offered at $150 a course. The state was picking up that bill, 13,000 students a seat for that same money. How does $2 million offering the route through course choice make sense? It does not to me. I could go through facts and facts and facts. I can email everybody. But the statistics show that LVS worked. I'm not here to challenge the face-to-face because we want to provide that. We actually reached out to a local company in Vermilion, that is going to do the face-to-face that Superintendent White is discussing. Except his cost to us will be $0 because it's a win-win for them and us. And how is that so? Because we are going to provide the student the skills that are needed so that when he gets out, he is a successful worker for that company. He will know the weld. He'll know the technology. We are creating those partnerships with our local companies without a course choice and giving him any MFP dollars. This is available across the state. Every one of the superintendents that are working with their local companies, we are working with them to provide the workers that are needed. LVS worked. Instead of taking the money and investing in course choice, let's bring LVS back. That's what people want. Let's bring it back and just make it better. Course choice, failed once in the courts. I'd hate to see it a second time, but LVS worked. We loved it, and actually several districts utilized it to the extent that when they had to pay the $150, we were one of them. We fought it and wanted to offer it ourselves. That's why we created our own virtual school, because $150 was still a little bit too much. but we could have invested that money into LVS and made it more successful. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments. Any other testimony? That's it? Any further discussion from the board?
You know, it might be worth just, Ken Bradford was the founder of LVS. He then went on to found Course Choice.
No.
So it might be worth just hearing from Ken. I'll be honest, of all the discussions we've had, this one strikes me as I'm having a hard time making sense of it myself. But so Ken, maybe you can do a better job describing it. You've been much more experienced than I am.
Ken Bradford, Office of Content, Department of Education.
If you could get a little closer to the microphone.
Ken Bradford, Office of Content with the Department of Education. I've been with the department 11 years. I came to the department at year 2 when the virtual school was at 130 students. I was just finishing up my master's degree at LSU in educational technology, and my project was to develop an online U.S. history class. So I came in to the LVS in 2002. We grew the LVS in 2002 from 130 students and 10 offerings up to a peak of, back in 2009, we reached approximately 8,000 student enrollments. Since then, with state funding cuts and our cost for curriculum, the state virtual school this year just concluded with 3,447 student enrollments. That's what we had this year. The trend that we're seeing in the virtual school was that we did purchase curriculum. It wasn't in-house developed curriculum. We were purchasing courses from many of the major providers that a lot of the school districts that are here today, where they go and purchase theirs. And it got to a point where the reason our enrollments were decreasing is because there was it was cost heavy. 10 years ago, when I was at the virtual school, we would go out and find some of the best teachers in Louisiana. We would bring them in. We would ask them to develop courses for us, and they would do that. Fast forward to today, those courses that were developed 10 years ago, they would bore students to death. The bells and whistles that are in these courses today, we have to outsource. We can't have teachers develop them for us. So there was a cost. The other thing, relative to the $150, that's been brought up a lot today. School districts paid $150 to the state virtual school, but that was only a piece of the cost for a Louisiana virtual school course. We also had an 8G funding to the tune of approximately $2 million last year that was put towards it. That was subsidizing the cost of the instructors. Additionally, we had a state allocation for some advanced placement courses that was subsidizing the cost. If you went and you put all of the students in the denominator and you put the total cost of the virtual school in the numerator, it was significantly more than the $150. And I can assure you, those districts that have worked with us thus far, that the Louisiana Virtual School staff is still in place, and we are the staff that are administering the Course Choice program. The Course Choice content that we had partnered with Louisiana School for Math, Science, and Arts. And that same content, a lot of the same instructors, they still reside at the Louisiana School for Math, Science, and Arts. And students have the option to take those courses. So I just wanted to bring some of those facts together. And Mr. Free was alluding to a fact, something about the 80%. I'm not quite sure where he was going with that, but a lot of the course titles that students are taking through Course Choice, there are some of them that are very similar to what students were taking in the state virtual school, but that's because there's a demand for them. We've had a significant demand for foreign language courses. To get a top scholarship in this state, you need to have 2 years of foreign language. That's one of the reasons the virtual school is a big provider of foreign language. There is no waivers that the TOPS office or law school will give for students, so you have to have foreign language courses. So it's still a lot of the same course offerings. We've talked about Algebra 1. There's 130 middle schools in the state of Louisiana that do not offer Algebra 1. Here's an opportunity for these students that are ready to take Algebra 1. We talked about course titles. The Louisiana Virtual School, we could offer 30 course titles. This school year, we literally have hundreds of course titles that are available for students for whatever academic track they want to go down to. So with that being said, I'll take any questions if anyone has any about the virtual school or the direction of the Course Choice program.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Garber.
I have some questions. You said that last year we had roughly 3,000 students taking LVS?
Yes, sir. We're currently working on our end of the year report. The virtual school, we had one of our accountability metrics was, since we were 8G funded, we had an end of year report that we provide to the board every year. We're completing that report right now. We had 3,447 student enrollments last year in the state virtual school.
So the 5,000 student number that we heard earlier was not correct?
That's correct. And the number has fluctuated because a lot of times when we talk about 5,000, it goes back to the last BESE end-of-year report, which is our, quote, official report. So we were closer to the 5,000 number, not in the 12-13 school year, but the 11-12 school year. Yes, sir.
And do you know roughly how much the state allocation was?
This past year, for the 12-13, the BESE allocation was approximately $2 million.
Right. I thought you said there was an additional.
And then there was a separate stream of funding that was targeted towards some algebra coursework, some algebra offerings, and some advanced placement offerings.
Roughly, do you know how much?
$200,000.
And the $150 per student times 3,000 students, it's another $500,000?
At least, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Chair?
Ms. Bophy?
Yes. So I appreciate the opportunity to have talked to you about course choice early on, from some of the early days when we were thinking about what this would look like and those kinds of things. And I remember a whole lot of excitement on your part about the possibility for course choice. So I would like to hear about where you think. I mean, I'm sure because you're in charge of this, I'm sure you have a vision for where it might go and what outcomes it might bring for students. So I'd appreciate it if you would speak to that and where you expect and hope for this to go.
Certainly. One of the things that we're very excited about is it has given us an opportunity to kind of step back over the last year and realize what are some pieces we can build into the program to make it even more effective, and what pieces can we bring along with the course choice program to keep that accountability in there. One of the things that we have done is we have a counselor assistance center. That was something that was never available in the Louisiana virtual school. We have licensed professional Louisiana counselors that serve the course choice program, and they can call, parents can call a toll-free number. They can speak with one of our counselors. School counselors can call the department, get the counselor assistance center, talk about what course offerings might be available to the students. Also, we talk about one of the best practices in the Louisiana virtual school that made it very transparent and open for the districts was every 3 weeks in the Louisiana virtual school, we would post a grade in progress so that the parents, the students, and the school district knew how that student was progressing across the course. We have the same mechanism built into the course choice program. Every school and parent will have dashboard access they can come into, and they can track the progress of their students academically as the course is going on. Providers will submit grades in progress every 3 weeks, just like they did in the state virtual school.
And then, so I'm thinking about how it's different, but at the same time how you took lessons learned from the Louisiana virtual school. So we have an added amount of support with the counselors, we have added accountability here, and we have added course offerings. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And to me, when I think about course choice and thinking about the offerings, there's offerings here that we have now that we haven't had in the past, but that's something that we can continue to grow over time. So when I look at this, I think that our opportunities are limitless, and that this is, when we start thinking about our students' needs and what we have to do to help our students become college ready and career ready, this is a wonderful way to do it. So I appreciate your work with this, Mr. Bradford.
My name is Dave Lepquith. I work with Ken on this. There was one other aspect of the future of course choice that I wanted to get into that I think will make you happy as well. One of the things we're looking for next year is a way to combine the academic and the career training courses so that a student not only graduates with certain job skills, but with confirmation that they have the literacy and numeracy to succeed in the 21st century workplace, which will increasingly include the need to be literate and numerate to handle high technology equipment. Interestingly, the superintendent of the Ascension Parish School District had also come up with this concept and is working on it as well. And so as Superintendent White has said several times, one of the things that's been true is that LVS and course choice have helped catalyze a lot of innovative efforts that are happening out in the districts as well. And I think so you have to look at the whole picture. It's not only what LVS used to do, but it's what course choice and all these initiatives out in the district do now. That is sort of the spawn of LVS.
Mr. Chairman, can you get him to identify himself?
Yes, again, he did
My name's Dave Lefquith, and I work with Ken. I'm assistant superintendent, and I work with Ken on course choice.
Mr. Romer, you had a question earlier, or comment?
Just a comment. I appreciate I've had the opportunity to meet with both gentlemen, and appreciate y'all's passion for what you do. It's awesome. I mean, the task they've undertaken, people underestimate just how difficult it is to create these opportunities for our students. And we have a hard question to ask, I mean, as a state, which is how are we going to pay for our students to be educated? It's a very fundamental question. And if a course is not provided by a school currently, but a student needs that course, how should we pay for it? And that is the billion-dollar question. So we ask why is it not expanding. I'll tell you why it's not expanding this year. The number of choices expanded. The number of choices expanded. Why is it not expanding? Because it's what I said at a previous meeting. Everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die to get there. So, Mr. Lee, you started the discussion, and it's one that we're not finished having, which is, A, how do we preserve quality? I think y'all done an outstanding job of, A, screening for vendors, and B, holding them accountable for results, more so than we ever had done previously with LBS. Even with LBS, we've improved that. Number two, we've expanded the course options tremendously. As I said in my own experience, my daughter had the choice of 8 or 9 or 10 different providers this year, and she went through each one of them on her own to identify which one she wanted to use and why. That in of itself is a valuable exercise, teaching responsibility. So this, I'll be honest, we do a lot of things around here. We chase our tail, and I think course choice could be the single most powerful tool we have to change the education fabric in this state. That's what I believe. Now, does that mean I think everybody's going to take every course online? No, I don't believe that at all. I think 95% of our course content is going to be taught in a traditional manner. But that 5% could change the world, could change somebody's life. Change that. Go across our state, and you'll find areas where they can't find a qualified AP chemistry teacher, or they can't find a qualified Algebra 1 teacher. Go, what if your child is in a class, in a school that doesn't offer a course that they need? What are we going to do as a state? What are we going to do? And I'm sorry, but the very people that came up here today to complain are the very, and this is political, are the very people who fight our attempts and file lawsuits against us when we try to expand options. Now, I know what it's about. You know what it's about? It's about the money. It's about the money. And nobody wants to have that discussion, and nobody wants to be frank about it. They want to hide behind false promises. It's about the money. Who's going to pay for it? Now, here's what I believe. Whoever provides the education ought to be paid the money. It's a radical, radical concept. And I know it's very politically unpopular to suggest it. But until we do that as a state, you know what we're going to do? Waste money. We got a good year in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Romo. I have Ms. Hill and then you, Mr. Lee.
I have a question, Mr. Ken. Tell me what caused the decline from 2011 to 2012 your 2011-2012 school year of the students participating in the Louisiana virtual school? Because I know you said it was roughly close to 5,000.
We had it's twofold. One, we had a reduction in our state funding, both AG and some of our direct state general funding for the program. And the second thing was our cost. As I alluded to earlier, the state virtual school, we were a broker of multiple providers. The Louisiana School for Math, Science, and Arts was providing some of our courses. as was some of the other major providers, like Apex Learning, like Class.com. So when a student would come in and they were working on their courses, they would, the instructor might have actually been an instructor at LSMSA. It wasn't a department staff member. It could have been an instructor with Apex Learning, or it could have been an instructor with like a Class.com. And so those costs were continuing to rise. So as cost goes up for curriculum, materials that go with the course, as well as a reduction in state funding, that led to a decline in the program. And what we had to do was actually reduce our offerings down to the amount that it's at this year, which was 30 course offerings in those core academic areas.
Yeah. And I guess for me, my concern, because I represent a very impoverished area and very rural area, and Mr. Roman's not here because I disagree with some of his comments, because when you look at the population, speaking for myself that I serve, and we talk about course choice, to me there isn't no choice, because you only have 2,000 students throughout the state of Louisiana that are actually utilizing these services. And when I look at the population that I serve, and they're only able to actually have these courses if the local school district offers it, because most of the times they don't have computers, they don't have internet in those areas, or they can't afford it. And so my concern when we look at the course choice, and we use that word very loosely, choice, that it's a choice across the board. And yes, there are groups that are benefiting from it, but the mass majority of the people that need it, they can't get the access of it. And so that's my concern of the entire program.
Jim?
Mr. Lee?
I had not intended to say anything, but the discussion has gotten political and money and all other things, and I think we need to get back to the subject before us. The virtual school program has worked, and I don't know anybody that's been dissatisfied. I've not heard a single complaint, not from any of the speakers, not from the superintendent. It's a program that's worked, and it does need to be expanded. But it's a state agency. It's controlled better than what we know that farming it out to private vendors is going to be. We just don't know. When you go course choice, you don't know what kind of results you're going to get. I just think because it's an area that has worked, has potential of being a whole lot better than what it has been. I just think it's questionable about whether we need to ditch that and just go a completely different route. Now, to me, that's at what could be, and I hadn't heard yet whether it's going to be more cost or not, but it sounds like it could be more cost.
Any further
Jim?
discussion from the board? Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, a couple more questions, Mr. Bradford. Can you tell me what the average cost is for the course choice courses?
$700.
$700. Okay, I thought I'd heard $1,200 earlier, but
The
$700.
tuition, just to be clear, as part of the 4-month process for the board to authorize providers in December, the tuition bid ranged anywhere from $179 up to $1,200, depending on the course offering that the provider had proposed.
The 179, was that the...
That would have been the lowest bid from a
That would have been an
provider.
online
That
course?
would have been the lowest tuition for a course, yes, sir.
And that would have been an online course?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If I understand it right, correct me if I'm wrong, with the LVS courses, weren't there local instructors that had to work with the students in addition to their online coursework?
Each school site did provide an on-site, what we call the facilitator, yes, sir.
Roughly, how many hours per course would a teacher have to work with a student taking an LVS course, a local teacher?
Typically, it was structured for 1 school period per day. The student
So
would go
throughout
to
the
computer lab.
course of the course, how many hours would that be for a teacher per student?
Well, it would be 1 course period per day throughout the school year. If there's 100.
1 hour times 5 days a week times how many weeks?
36 in a school year.
36. And so the cost of that teacher would have to be added in if someone's trying to compare the cost of LBS courses to the course choice courses, wouldn't you say?
Well, I would say that, yes, there was an indirect cost that was being provided. That was a service being provided by the local school district.
My calculations, these courses come out cheaper for course choice than it does for the LBS then. If you add all of that in, plus the state allocation, plus the local $150.
Yeah, I don't have all the numbers crunched in front of me, but I think to your point and to another point that was made earlier, part of the course choice authorization process is that every course provider had to provide the instructional materials as well. And so for these courses, some of our advanced, we have several advanced placement courses that we couldn't offer before because we didn't have the capacity and we didn't have the curriculum for it that are being offered through course choice. Those courses alone have several textbooks that come along with them that providers are having to provide.
Well, then even more so, it looks like these course choice courses are cheaper than the LBS.
Any further discussion?
Mr.
Ms. Jones?
Briefly, I just want to thank you for your leadership, for your institutional perspective. I think you said 11 years with the department, and as I see it, this direction has the ability to build on much of what we've learned and been able to benefit from with the virtual model to begin with, and actually expand it and diversify it so that it serves more children. When I think about what this could mean for families and children to have more opportunities across the state, I'm incredibly encouraged. And so I just want to thank you publicly and the department for moving in this direction.
Okay, is there any objection to the motion on the floor to approve item 8.1? Mr. Lee objects. Anybody else? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 128, item 8.2, consideration of a 2013 legislative action plan. The recommendations are to receive the report and to amend the agenda.
Okay, do I have that motion from a
So
board member?
moved.
Who was that? Ms. Bophy, second? Ms. Jones? Any discussion on this item? Okay, I have Ms. Berrios. She'd like to speak to this? Okay. Dr. Finney? Okay, passes. Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 132, item 9.1, consideration of revisions to the Louisiana Administrative Code, Title 28, Part 1, Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. The recommendation is to approve.
So moved.
Ms. Bophy, do I have a second? Ms. Jones? Mr. Romo, would you like to speak to this item?
I do, and I actually think a lot of this, what you see, is cleanup. So, and I think you can go through that and see most of that's pretty self-evident. There are a couple of items that I would highlight, and you may have others that you want to talk about. One of which I actually would recommend based on yesterday's retreat that we consider removing, because we actually have the ability, and it became clear yesterday. One of the things we did in our retreat yesterday was we often have questions about what is policy versus practice, et cetera, and that became clarified. So item 5 on page 12 two things have become clear through the discussion. One is that any board member can add agenda items, and we've talked at length about that. The second part of item 5 was meant to, which is 5B, was if a member just wanted to kind of randomly bring up an item, no member would be limited from bringing that up, but that the chair would have the ability to limit that discussion to 10 minutes. And it's kind of like almost a personal privilege. I really don't think other BESE members may disagree with me. I don't know that we need that, given that we do have the ability, and what this was calling for was a majority vote to continue the discussion. Actually, don't think we really probably need that. And we can end discussion now. It takes 2/3 vote, but we can't end discussion if somebody feels like the discussion has gone long enough. So that's a comment right now, not an alternative motion, but I'm curious as to other board members' thought on that. The second thing I would make clear on page 12 on item 6, on comment cards. Item 6, it says the comment cards should be submitted at least 5 minutes. It doesn't say, I want to make this clear, it doesn't say they must be submitted 5 minutes before a committee. We would like to encourage people to turn in cards so that the chair can run the meeting better by having a sense of how many comment cards we have, but we also realize that some people show up late and or perhaps didn't know exactly what an item might be. I want to make it clear that item 6 doesn't mean the chair would be prohibited from allowing somebody who did not fill in a card to come up and speak. So other than that, I think the remainder of it is fairly straightforward. So,
thank you, Mr. Romer. Any other board comments, Ms. Beebe?
Well, just to speak to item 6, so often as a BESE member, I don't know if we want to start the meeting 30 minutes prior to the scheduled time, so that could pose a problem for those individuals who arrive late, thinking that it's going to start at 8:30 and actually it starts at 8. So I think item 6 is one that we need to.
What page is that?
That's on page 144.
The same item you just commented on.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I just think it presents a problem for many because, it's at the will of the chairperson of the committee to start 30 minutes in advance. And I know that's a policy we have. We have that liberty to start 30 minutes prior to the meeting. But
I don't think I disagree with you. I'm saying that you don't.
Page 12,
This doesn't mean if you don't submit it 5 minutes prior to that you're prohibited from doing so. This just says we're asking the audience, if you know you're going to speak to an item, we'd like you to turn in your card early. But if you show up late or whatever, you're not. The chair can recognize somebody that has not done that. Is that how y'all read that? I want to make sure. I mean, I didn't draft the language, but
I think
okay,
Dr.
But my concern, if I may, Mr. Garvey, I mean, we're on this board at this time. This becomes policy. And let's say in the future that, there is a question, well, some people may take this literally that you have to have the card written or completed 5 minutes prior to the start of the meeting.
You have to.
Huh?
It doesn't say you have to.
Well, then why do we need it?
It's trying to promote the process when you can promote, it's applicable.
That it should be.
That's what it's there for.
So should be. Not shall, but should be would be should.
Thank you for your input, Dr. Beebe. Any other comments from the board? Ms. Bofi?
Oh, just in reading it, I'd like to point out in here that we have something about people not reading to us, and I think that's another thing that we should promote, that if somebody's going to be reading from a document, that they can just hand that to us or get it to staff to get to all of us.
Okay, thank you.
I totally disagree. I feel that if anyone from the public wants to come up and read, that's their duty. I mean, if I want to sit there and read, I shouldn't have to bring it to the board. If I want to, that's okay, but being a public body, we shouldn't stop people and tell them how they should come before us, what they should read and what they should not read. So I have to disagree with Ms. Bofi on that one.
Thank you, Ms. Hill.
And
Dr.
I would
Beebe?
have to echo what Ms. Hill has said, because whatever the exceptionality or what have you, I like to have paper in front of me because it keeps me focused, whether I'm ADD or ADHD, and some people may have that condition. So for us to say, if you have a paper before you, that you should.
Or you want to read it.
And if you want to read, and sometimes,
I'm sorry, can you point to the page?
And oftentimes, I understand, but oftentimes, if you're limited to 2 minutes, you have a prescribed statement to read, and I think that, for the most part, I think that would be the intent, not just, just to get up for the sake of reading it, but to stay within time constraints.
Which item is that, Ms. Bofi?
It's in this code somewhere.
Okay.
But we discussed it yesterday
In
in
the
the
code.
retreat.
Number 5.
We do have some comment cards. I'm going to go ahead and go to those now. Ms. Berrios?
Is somebody pointing to the page and
Mr. Romer, in honor and appreciation for a comment you made a couple of meetings ago, that as long as you were president, you would honor the open meetings laws. I want to point out that a possible glitch in the policy as it exists now that you might want to address. As you know, I filed an open meetings lawsuit against the BESE board, the Department of Ed, and Chairman Falk of the Superintendent's Advisory Committee a few months back because nobody was allowed to speak at a SAC committee in February. And I got no response to that, and assuming it would happen again, I filed a lawsuit. The judge ruled, based on a presentation by all 3 attorneys, that in fact the SAC's committee was not an open meeting, did not have to follow open meeting laws. The premise for that, which was, in my opinion, convoluted, but he was the judge, was that according to state open meetings laws, public meetings are not allowed to have proxies, voting proxies. Therefore, because the advisory councils are allowed to have voting proxies, that the transverse or the inverse is true, therefore it makes it not a public meeting.
Ms. Berrios, could you reference a specific item?
Yes, on page 140, it starts talking about advisory councils, and then on page 141, item 5 at the top talks about proxies. So my point is that evidently I lost the lawsuit based on something I would never have put those 2 pieces together. But it's possible that if you want to maintain this open meetings and make it fair to the public in the event of a breach of public meeting, that you remove the ability of those advisory councils to have a voting proxy. Otherwise, you need to make the public aware that this, in fact, is not in a court of law an open meeting, subject to the open meetings laws. And I could give you a copy of that ruling. You should have gotten it. But so that's one of my concerns. If you're ready to move on, I just have one other.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. My other concern is on page 144, a little below number 6, number 9. It says public comments under the new proposal are limited to no more than 3 minutes per individual and 5 minutes per designated spokesperson or group organization. The chair may increase or decrease the time allotted to speakers within time constraints. And the discussion, I believe, yesterday was that that sometimes meetings get long and you need to limit, or you want to limit public input, and that evidently this would allow you to do that. And I really believe that that's subverting the open meetings law and the ability of the public, responsibility of the public to offer comment. And I would appreciate it if you would remove that, the ability to decrease the time allotted to speakers.
Thank you, Ms. Berrios. Dan Garrett?
Dan Garrett, representing the Louisiana School Board Association. First of all, historical note. I'm sorry. Dan Garrett, representing the LSBA. As an historical note, I actually drafted the public meetings bill for then Speaker Pro Tem Bruno about a decade or so ago because somebody showed up at a Recreation Board meeting and they didn't let him speak. So I followed it through my career because it's sort of what I do for a living. I'd call your attention to 2 items. First of all, number 6, and it's already been brought up, and that was actually my first question is the should mandatory? Is the should be mandatory? Because this is a new provision being added. Now, that exact same language currently exists on the back of your form. It's part of your policy. This puts it in the administrative code. If it's not mandatory, then I fail to see why it's there. One of the comments was that the chair would not be prohibited from allowing someone to speak if they had not met that. Well, I guess my question is, would the chair be authorized under this administrative code provision to prohibit someone from speaking because they failed? I mean, I think that is a big deal when it comes to the public comment period. Originally, I drafted it, it was much more broad. Because I had convinced Mr. Bruno that public bodies would comply in this, but over the years, as one public body or another abused the authority granted under the reasonable rules provision, it's gotten more and more and more restrictive. The other item that of note, I don't know of any other public body that requires that the cards be submitted prior to the beginning of the meeting. Y'all have already discussed the issue of your meetings have a provision, again, that I've never seen, that allows the meetings to actually start a half hour before they're noticed. And so I think that's an issue that y'all need to decide. Now, if a matter of policy, if y'all say no, if someone has a card, like the last item, I brought the card up because it was an issue in your debate that then caused me to feel like I needed to speak. The other item is item 9. It actually changes the phrase should be to are. Now, I cannot imagine why that's there unless it's to make it mandatory. So it seems that even if you had a circumstance where you were not pressed for time, and even if you had a circumstance where you did not have a large number of people, why do you start with 3 minutes? And I don't understand the need for the change in the should be to an are. And that's what I guess makes me worried about provision 6, is if the default is going to be 3 minutes, period, or the default is going to be you have to file your card before the meeting begins, then you have to get an exception to exceed that. And I think that does work counter to, I can tell you what was the intent of the public comment period when it was originally drafted, because I drafted it. And I know what Mr. Bruno wanted to accomplish. And I don't know that either of these foster that. So I ask you to take that into consideration, and certainly if this board makes the determination that no, the chairman's always going to let someone speak, regardless of when they filed their card, I guess that's, we would take your word at that. But again, I'm not sure why it needs to be added to the administrative code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett.
I have a couple questions.
Okay, sure.
Dan, I appreciate you coming in. I noticed your comments in the press this morning. You're worried about your ability to not be silenced. And
yes.
And I take that seriously. How many times have you testified today?
Many.
I think 4.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think public input is as important as anything we do in this room. And so I completely agree with that. And I want you to, every time you feel like a last minute, you want to come up and comment and you put a card in it, I think you need to have that authority to do that. As I understand, I think there's an intent behind some of this, and actual, as lawyers, we can kind of look at the language and all that. I think the intent is to try to figure out, when you have a lot of people trying to give input, how do you ensure the caboose in the train has as much ability to get their point across as the first car. And I think most of this is trying to figure out how you get, public input comes not just from the first person to speak, but also the last person to speak, and how you make sure everyone has a choice. And so I think the intent is 100% on board with everyone. At least I don't want to speak for everyone, I speak for myself. I know the word should is used a lot in legislative drafting. I mean, can you think of a case where it's used where it means shall or must?
Well, actually, I would argue that should is generally generally disfavored, because it doesn't.
But it is used throughout.
Because ordinarily, administrative code actions, which have the force and effect of law, and statutes, are generally supposed to dictate what is to be done or what is not to be done. And when you use a term that is, I guess, more vague, such as should, I mean, the fact is you could say shall be, or you could be silent. Because if you're silent, you achieve exactly what you achieve as putting should be in the administrative code. Now, clearly, y'all can adopt a public meetings policy, which is what I understood was envisioned by the reasonable rules provisions, is to adopt an open meetings policy, which, again, encourages people to file them ahead of time. Because I understand, I've represented public bodies my whole career. I know that you need that information.
I think you're right on that. I think should is used several times, and when challenged in court, I think typically, I mean, I can't speak for every time, the courts have said it's not a mandatory language. And so, as I understand, this is meant to encourage this type of practice so that the chair, as they're going through, how many people do we have to speak? Do I have 5 people or 500 people? That's where you try to make sure the last person has the same amount of time. That's what I understand this should to mean here. And so, maybe different language like encourage to or something like that if it gives clarity, because I don't think this language is meant to say, if you don't do 5 minutes, no way, because what you just did 10 minutes ago, that needs to be the practice every time. If you're encouraged when you hear something, you need to be able to come up. I agree with that 100%.
And I think, and like I said, it's interesting that both changes, both to number 6 and number 9, are being proposed in the same set of administrative rules, because then you get to the point, well, if should is not mandatory, it's merely to encourage. Well, isn't that what 9 does? I mean, wasn't the original code
don't ignore
provision-
the second sentence in 9.
Well, what I'm saying is, then I don't understand the need for the change
That's more of a
9.
rewording as I read it, and again, it's not my language. I read that as a rewording as in, again, it's an encourage, but it gives the discretion to the chair to say you can go up or down depending on how many people want. I mean, when you're talking about language and how it's enforced to the chair, that's
And that's why I think understand that, I don't understand the change in the should be to the are. And I do think it creates a trap for the unwary for the chair. Because if it's R, and everybody's being held to 3, and then there's a speaker that the chair or a majority of the members want to hear more information from, I mean, right now, my timer went off a while ago, you then end up with a situation where one member of the public is going to get more say. Now, it's because of the back and forth, and that's a good thing. So I don't understand the need to lock it in at 3, and I think it was originally drafted to where you're going to encourage people to make comment, but in the situations where you do have to, in order to accommodate everybody and give the caboose, as you say, the same opportunity, you do have to restrict. I can tell you, in my 15
Mr. Garrett,
plus years
if I could
at the
get you to
Capitol,
go ahead and wrap up your
certainly,
comments,
in my
please.
15 years plus at the Capitol, very, very exceedingly rarely has a committee ever limited comment to a time period. Oddly enough, it was the most recent occasion was in the Education Committee. But again, it's because he had a room full of people, and I think they were trying to let everybody have a bit of time, and they had to be done by a certain time. I think one of the things that may be time for this board to consider is this committee day. And the issue,
Mr. Garrett, please
the
wrap up
public
your
has gotten
comments.
so much involved in education policy, which I think is a very good thing. It may be time to spread this out over multiple days, because I don't ever see this as a big problem on your meeting day, but I was here for that 10-hour meeting a few months ago, and I don't think anybody enjoyed it, and I don't think anybody, and I know a lot of people had to leave and didn't get their comments.
Mr. Garrett, I'm going to have to cut you off. Thank you for your input.
Well, and I would just say one other thing, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I do want to state that you've had the most input of anyone in this room today, and I congratulate you for that. And I hope you feel like you've had more ability to have input and not have been silenced today. I hope you feel that way. The second thing is I agree with your comments on number 6. And I think the spirit of what the drafters meant to say is to try to put some guardrails so all of the public can participate and not just the loudest and the first in line. You want everyone to be able to give input. So at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, I may make an amended motion to alter some of that language to try to, I think, reflect some of that.
Thank you, Mr. Wagstaff. Ms. Garrett, thank you for your input. Mr. Moynihan, I'm going to ask you to come up, if you would. You're going to be next, but I'm going to ask Mr. Romer to comment, and then I'm going to ask Ms. Koch for a clarification.
I would also ask the audience and board members to consider something that we often deal with that's a little bit unique, which is we don't strictly hold speakers accountable to the word on the agenda item. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want to get to the point where you're that narrowly defined. Speakers we often kind of find an issue that's somewhat related to the agenda item and we talk about it, so it becomes a difficulty on if you're going to be lenient on allowing a little leeway on the agenda item. Can you control that everybody gets a chance to speak? It's a very, I don't pretend there to be an easy answer. The purpose of this was to try to put some framework on how we'd like a meeting to run, but ultimately give the chair the discretion to judge, how long can I give speakers and get to, I got 500, we've had 1,000 people in the audience before. How do I get to number 1,000 and yet honor number 1 and number 1,000. So I don't know if this language is perfect or not. I'm certainly willing to consider amendments, and I'm certainly willing, to keep looking at it. So, but I wanted to.
I think what you're saying is that a strong chairman and in essence a strong president is the key to making anything work. Is that what you're saying?
I'd say strong chairs is better.
Thank you, Mr. Romer. Ms. Cope, if you just clarify this process and what we're going through and the next steps for everybody.
Sure. Members, just to clarify a few things. First of all, the BESE code actually isn't required by law to be an administrative code. To hold itself more accountable to the public and be more transparent, the board, at some point in time, I'm guessing early in its creation with the revised constitution, decided to put its policies and procedures into code. And so we don't have to run this process and do notices of intent and run these as rules and publish these in the registers. But the board chose to, so that way the public would know what the internal policies of the board operations would be and how the board would govern itself and its actions. So really these are just, as Mr. Garrett referred to, sort of our internal policies and practices. And this is us saying publicly, this is how we intend to conduct our business. So that's what this all is. The fact that it's in code is just an extra step that you all take to give the public an opportunity to engage on this. We run it through the NOI process like we do any other bulletin revision to allow for that 20-day comment period, and then be able to bring it back and say, you're right, we heard some good comments, we want to change this, and be really transparent. So a lot of the additions in here, especially in this section, are just meant to align with some of the practices we had been doing and had been on the back of our comment cards, and be more consistent in how we treat things and give people a better framework of how you all intend to run your meetings. So if whatever revisions you all approve today, we will run as an NOI. It will go through that process. There will be a 20-day comment period. If we receive comments, we will come back to you all with those comments, and you will be able to say, yes, we want to change that, no, we don't, and we'll move forward with that process per usual. But again, just to emphasize, this is the board's way of publicly stating what its internal policies and practices are in a way that the public can engage in.
Thank you, Ms. Cope. I'd like to recognize Representative Havard, who's joined us, West Feliciana Parish. Yeah, appreciate you joining us.
I'm sorry, Mr. Young, if I can just add one other clarification. In open meetings law, any public body is allowed the opportunity to put rules and restrictions on how comment is to be received. And that's not meant to restrict who can speak, but to say you must take comment if you're a public body and it's a public meeting. But if you want to have people turn in cards or you want to take a certain order, set a time limit, you are within your authority to do that if you are clear about what those rules and regulations are.
Thank you, Ms. Cope. Mr. Moynihan?
Thank you, and I do appreciate having the opportunity to address the board, and I do appreciate the fact that the opportunity is a symbol of the democracy we are all supposed to cherish so much. And I do agree with my good friend, Mr. Romer, in regard to that. This is America, and it's a great country, and I think we can make it even better. I would hope that you receive the comments, and the comments are very, very, very streamlined and specific to the policy, but please don't assume any intent on the part of this presentation other than what I'm telling you it is. I've heard comments early in the meeting, and I have to address it because I have integrity and I'm civil with the board. Don't assign intent to why an organization does what it must do. I'm happy to have that discussion with any individual board member at any time in regard to why we litigate and why we don't. So I have to say it for a record because I was personally offended by some of the comments. However, that being what it is, on the first section is section 315. It is page 5, section C. There is a striking of language that requires BESE to approve the appointment of individuals to positions. I understand that BESE, and I understand that's in alignment actually with what's happening under Act 1, but I also believe under transparency it would be in the best interest of BESE and the public if at each board meeting the public would be informed of who hirees were, and the board, whether it acts on it or not, that language could be amended to at least provide with complete disclosure.
Mr. Monahan, I didn't follow that. Would you clarify that for me, please?
I'm sorry. It is section 315, page 5, section C, and it strikes the language that requires the board to adopt or to approve of the recommendations. Page 7 through 9 is section 503. And I think this is just a bit of confusion. It could be housekeeping or it could be my misunderstanding. There is new language that sets up, it seems, a lot of conflict in regarding the voting rights of proxies. Some sections of 503 address task force directly, while other sections do not. It makes it difficult whether to understand, while as in advisory councils, everyone who has a proxy has a voting right, but in I believe when we discuss the MFP task force, proxies are specifically not afforded a voting right. So I think there has to be clarification. Particularly, the conflict becomes between Section D of that's 503 and Section F. In section, I'm going fast with respect to the time. I only have 3 more. Section 705, and this is with respect to the business of this board and the fact that I know you all like to do your due diligence. And to me, I think it's a clarification issue. It indicates that board members should receive the agenda 10 days prior, or it says distribute the agenda 10 days prior to the meeting. It doesn't specify whether these are calendar days. It doesn't speak to the definition there are working days. It also doesn't speak to whether we're speaking of receipt or just distribution. So with your own board, I've seen it come up within the BESE board controversy in regard to packets received, packets not. So maybe the method of distribution could be included in that rule. In section 709, I will say this, and I'll do so, I hope, graciously. I do understand the definition of should, and I respect the board in regard to what I heard the intent is, and hopefully that procedure will continue just as it was expressed, that there is no attempt to try to disallow comment. And actually, I heard Mr. Wagsback reassure us that he would hope that we would react when we hear things that are important to all stakeholders. Finally, and I think it's a longstanding concern that we've had in regard to where this goes after today. This is the notice of intent. So I refer to section 1303. We would strongly recommend that there be a timeline for the promulgation of rules. Rules are given initial approval by the board, have to be published in the register, which opens the 90-day public comment. I believe I just heard reference to that in the time for public reaction to the rule. But I think with the rules that fly through this body, it's really hard to keep up with it. And there was some suggestion in order to keep the public better informed that we would have some indication either online or what have you, that these rules are in the rulemaking process, in particular with bulletins in regard to the past we discussed in regard to teacher evaluation. It seemed it was in flux so much, it was very difficult to keep up with what the rule was in process. So in speaking of, and I know there's enough lawyers in here to mess it all up or to fix it, but if we really want to, the process of allowing the public to know when the 90 days actually starts, where the rulemaking, where that rule is at that particular point, I think we should give some thought to. And finally, and this is my final comment, I do appreciate the opportunity or whatever extension of my 5 minutes may have been afforded to me, but I think there also has to be some closure on that 1303 section. Right now, it seems very unclear. After the 90 days, does this board have to vote, or does it occur, does a rule become an adopted rule of the body just at the exhaustion of a 90-day time period? It was an issue when we were discussing rules of dealing with the school choice, with the whole idea of how we would vet schools, the accountability piece of that. And it was the first time we actually tried to push to have that follow-up public comment. And that's a whole other discussion, members of the board, in the rules that how that particular process should occur when and if it does occur. It wasn't, as far as one participant, I did not feel that, I felt very much that the mechanics were satisfied, but in actually feeling that we were impacting policy or having a constructive input into a rule that was not yet finalized, I felt it was an exercise that was a waste of time because it was obvious. So I'm trying to be very civil and not insult anyone. So I think we can improve that policy. Finality means what, and how do you reach it, and how do you keep score of the rules that are flying through this body so that the public can be aware of where the rule stands at a given moment. Thank you.
Dr. Finney?
Let me reverse my usual and start with the negative and end with a positive note. First, something nitpicky. It would sure be a lot easier if I didn't have to write out the full name of the committee each time, but instead check the box for whichever committee this is. If I feel compelled to fill out a green card for every topic that I might want to speak on before the meeting. With respect to Ms. Boffey's remarks about written testimony, although I usually have a piece of paper in front of me, you wouldn't want to try to read the illegible chicken scratching that I'm trying to read something similar to when I come up here. In the event that I do submit ever written testimony, it would be more to make a point that I wanted something on the public record, because I know there's not a ghost of a chance that the board members would have time to absorb any written information I would submit before the usual 9-2 vote. But I promised I would end on a positive note, so I do appreciate the opportunity to turn in cards late if I suddenly become inspired to speak. I appreciate the latitude you give with respect to the 3-minute time limit, which I would guess I probably exceeded at times either today or 2 months ago. And I do appreciate it when you give folks some discretion and some latitude in terms of how relevant their comments are, because I like picking at the Recovery School District whenever I possibly can. Thank you much.
Thank you for the input. Melanie?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. As someone who has attended a number of your board meetings, I'm always struck by your patience with the public and how much patience is required of your job, but to have us all speak. But I would ask if you would reconsider 2 of these items. One is not allowing reading. As one who herself finds it very intimidating to get up here in front of all of y'all, having a written document in front of me that I may sometimes read from is very comforting, and I do this more often than most, so I would discourage that. I mean, that's very intimidating for someone to feel like they can't look down and read a document when they're limited, especially to 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever it ends up being. The other one is also, as others have mentioned, and that I'm thrilled to hear that you may reconsider the notion that comment cards must be submitted at least 5 minutes prior to the beginning of the meeting. I think first, just by having that written up, most people don't understand the legal distinctions of should, would, must, whatever. And I think it would have a pulling. I just now submitted this because I didn't realize this would be something I'd be interested in until the discussion began. So I think, we could certainly say, it is requested, or, we would appreciate, or that we, but to make the word should even, I think, is only a lawyer as us lawyers would know what that meant. And I hate to see the notion that it looks like you're trying to not let people, and I think that's the sense of it. Also, the 30 minutes, beginning 30 minutes early, I do find that's difficult. Often I have come in after a meeting has begun without realizing that was happening. And again, I think to someone who doesn't normally come to these meetings, that may not, that's a foreign notion that a meeting could start early, and so they would have missed that opportunity as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your input. Ms. Bofi?
Yeah, in regards to the reading comment, and I'm sorry I had to step out for an important call, but it's okay with me if people bring things up. I completely understand that you have points to make and you might have an outline. I can tell you, and you read this morning at the MFP, the 8G public hearing, it is really difficult as a board member to absorb the kinds of things when people are rushing to get points in and the 3 minutes or 5 minutes. It's going to go straight over my head. So I'm going to tell you as a board member, if you want me to get something, if you talk to me as opposed to read to me, I'm more likely to attend and be able to absorb it. And it was already in code. It's been in code. And based on practice here on the board, I don't see myself changing. I'm a visual learner, but if somebody's having a conversation with me, I'm more likely to be able to absorb that.
Well, I appreciate that. I think maybe my solution is to bring documents in writing and hand them out as well as speak.
You tend to do a very good job of supplying us with information.
I don't know whether to say thank you now or not, but thanks so much.
Thank you. Mr. Garvey.
Oh, I'm sorry, may I just respond real quick? May I just say one more thing? The only thing I would say, Ms. Bobby,
What would you do if I said no? No, just go ahead.
You know what I would do. But I would just respond only that, again, I really appreciate that I should read and I will work on not reading, but I think to have that as a rule for people may intimidate them in terms of, you know what I'm saying, that if it's written somewhere and someone sees that and that's what they prepared, that may just, if they have a 3-minute limit, then it will limit their time anyway. Does that make sense? Anyway.
Thank you for your input. Appreciate that. Mr. Garvey?
Yes, we had several speakers today mention that starting 30 minutes early is a potential problem. And in particular, considering how hectic and crazy my schedule is, I'd like to consider that, ask that we consider starting or requiring that we start 10 minutes late every meeting. I think that would be very helpful for me.
That would have certainly helped you this morning.
It would have helped me this morning.
And Mr. Lee also. We have several great suggestions. I appreciate the members of the board who worked on this. I know it's going to be a notice of intent, so there will be opportunities going forward to have more input. I am going to open the floor up for alternate motions. There's been some suggestion that some of that would take place here. Is that the wish of the board at this time, that you'd like to modify some things, or go ahead and publish it as it is and come back and clean it all up at the end?
I have one recommendation. I think just to clarify one piece, I guess I would make a motion to approve with one suggestion, and that's on page 12, number 6. Change should be to are encouraged to be. Because I think that's the intent of what you're trying to do here. Comment cards are encouraged to be submitted at least 5 minutes prior to the beginning of the meeting. Because I view that provision as an important tool for the chair to try to be able to gauge the testimony so that everyone has an ability to contribute. And I think it's very important. Everyone is here in this room today because they care about getting these issues right. We have disagreements from time to time amongst board members or with the public, but at the end of the day, everyone's here because they care. They want to try to get these right. So I think the testimony is important. And I think if you say you're encouraged to, the goal is you can have a feel as the chair of how many people are going to participate, try to gauge that time accordingly. And I think that's what the spirit of the language is anyway. It may give some clarity to some of the folks who come in, but that's just my suggestion. So I'd make that in the form of a motion.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, so this is a substitute motion, and is there a second to that substitute motion? Does the original second have to agree to that, or can anybody second it?
You said to approve and to make the change, so that's a new motion.
Okay. Yeah, is there a second?
I'll second it, but
Mr. Lee?
I also want to make I don't have the wording down, but a suggestion that the staff would need to look at in regards to the 90-day notice. I think we do need to state here that action of the board is needed at the end of the 90-day notice, because that's not clear now.
Would you accept that, Mr. Wagisback?
We can't hear. The staff can't hear him.
Mr. Lee, would you restate it?
In the mic.
We need, on page 18, under chapter 13, it starts on page 149 of the booklet, but the 90-day notice, there needs to be action at the end of the 90-day notice to finalize the intent of the board. As it is right now, there is a question about when does it become effective? Before the 90-day period, after the 90-day period? I just think if there were a statement saying that some kind of final action constitutes implementation.
Quick question, Mr. Chairman. Is that a amendment to the substitute motion, or is it a directive to the staff to come back with language to try to address that question?
That's right. It's not an amendment to the motion.
We also had some other, like Ms. Barrios raised some legal questions about the proxy that I would think we'd want to have legal staff look at just to validate. I thought those were some great input.
Mr. Chair.
We'll be very careful
Ms.
about
Cope?
the decision we make.
If I can just clarify for the board, per Administrative Procedures Act, which is state law, we can't adopt a notice of intent as rule before 90 days has passed. That's part of APA, so we can't adopt anything prior to that per law.
So
whether or not the board wants to have staff come back to have final approval on something moving forward as a rule, that's up to you all, but just know that per law, we can't move faster than 90 days.
Thank you, Ms. Cope, for that clarification.
And Nina tells me that the board used to have that in code, that staff for any bulletin revision or any other matter had to come back with language before something ran as rule, and the board opted to pull that out of code. So just to have that history.
Thank you for that clarification.
Does Nina know why?
Good question.
Nina Ford, board recorder, BESE office. Several years ago, the board went through an extensive work group efficiency exercise. The members...
Where did that fail? Really, at what moment did you realize that failed? No.
The members of that committee were the three officers of the board. It was actually the executive committee, so it was the three officers of the board and the former past president, and several members of our staff and the LDE staff. And the gist of it was to condense all of the committee agendas and the board agenda as much as possible. At that time, every month we had notices of intent. We had an item called approval of notices of intent. Those notices of intent were printed, put in the board packets, and as a routine matter, they were approved for final adoption. The feeling at the time of the work group efficiency group was that that was not necessary, that the board intended when it approved something as notice of intent for it to move forward for final adoption as a rule at the end of the 90-day required advertisement period. And if we received public comments, that would automatically send it back to committee or to a public hearing, or depending on how many comments we received and if there were requests for public hearings, so that it was an unnecessary step. The intent was to streamline what was on the board agenda and not to have to rehash something that really was not, we didn't really need to rehash. So as the policy stands right now, once you approve something as notice of intent, at the conclusion of the required 90-day advertisement period, which begins on the day that the notice of intent actually runs in the register, not the day that the board approves it as notice of intent. At the conclusion of that 90-day period, if there have been no comments received on that item, then that item moves forward. I submit it to the state register for adoption as a rule. If public comments are received, then as you know, those comments come to you in committee for consideration. They're discussed. A summary report of public comments is prepared by the LDE. They give you their take and their recommended action.
So it'd be fair that we could clarify that within this
I think
code.
what she's saying, clarify the process in the code?
I think what the code says now is that when it's approved as a notice of intent, that grants the executive director authority to move the notice of intent forward at the conclusion of the 90-day period if there are no public comments received. And that's paraphrased, that's not a quote, but that's essentially what it says.
Mr. Lee?
I guess the question comes in, though, if there are public comments, and sometimes there are, we don't usually do anything with them.
Well, that's our business.
Now, I'm not sure if we consciously realize we need to make a decision about whether we should or
Well-
should not do anything with those comments.
You do make a decision, and you're required to make a decision if public comments are received. Now, your decision may be not to change a thing, or your decision may be based on the public comments to direct staff or the department, whoever is responsible for that notice of intent, to change something.
I know that's possible. I'm just
Well,
saying.
it's a requirement.
I'm not sure our present procedures recognize that we would need to take action if we want it incorporated, or even that we, what I see happening sometimes is people will come and make comments or submit comments, and then we never see or hear anything more.
So, Mr. Lee, if I can clarify, when we run something as notice of intent and we have the 20-day comment period, by law, and we do this, the department, because it's usually a bulletin with suggestions from the department puts together a response to those comments, presents it to the board with suggested edits that are sometimes responsive to comments, or they might say, you know, these comments, we receive them, we consider them, our recommendation is something else. But they bring that to you all and present it, and then you all decide whether or not you want to amend the language, not amend the language, whatever it is you want to do. And then we wait for your vote on that before we move forward again and either put something forward as rule or rerun something as a notice of intent.
Did I understand you to just say that whenever public comments are made, that it always comes back to the board for a decision about whether they will be included or not included?
To clarify, the comments that are received during the NOI, the notice of intent comment period, must be brought back. You all right now have not made a decision on whether or not to move these specific revisions forward. So you can incorporate comments you just heard into this language at this point. But anything we receive while something has been run as a notice of intent and received during the comment period has to be brought back to you all.
I'm just asking for clarification on items that normally require the 90-day comment period. Do we have the process now where we actually consciously either approve any changes as a result of that, or we do not?
You do.
Make any changes?
Yes.
Do we have a process that addresses that?
Yes. Any comments we receive are brought back to the board.
You say we do, then that's good enough.
They are in your committee packets, the last item on the agenda under public comments received regarding notices of intent. And each time those comments are received, those comments go to whoever in the department, if it's a department NOI, sponsored NOI, or BESE sponsored NOI, they go to that entity. That, in the case, let's say department, because it's usually department. In that case, Bridget Devlin takes lead on that for the department. She receives all of those public comments. She reads them. She condenses them. They confer. She prepares a report called, it's a SPCAR, Summary of Public Comments and Agency Response.
If you remember for 741,
Wait. I need to follow through with what she just said.
Okay. So Bridget prepares a summary of public comments and agency response.
Okay.
And in that document, she gives you a summary of what the public comments were.
Okay.
She gives you the department's recommendation about how the department would recommend that the board proceed. And then you get that as backup in your committee packet.
And we take action.
And y'all take action, yes, sir.
Okay, that's all I'm asking.
And I might add then, and after that point, a letter goes to the Legislative Oversight Committee citing the action that the board has taken, including the summary of public comments, including the notice of intent in its original format, and including anything else that y'all tell us that y'all want done with that NOI.
I just want to be sure we take action concerning the 90-day comment.
Extensive action.
You're saying we do, so that's good enough.
I want to make sure, Chair.
Mr. Romer.
However, when there's no public comment.
When there's no public
It does
comments.
not come back to us. It becomes rule at the end of that period.
No, sir.
Okay.
Per current BESE policy on that.
Per current BESE policy and per APA requirements, we're not required to bring it back to you. Once you approve it as notice of intent If there's no public comments to prohibit it running as a rule, it goes forward at the end of the required 90-day advertisement period.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. Dr. Beebe?
I just wanted to, someone made a comment regarding the rulemaking docket, and as I understand, there is a rulemaking docket link on our BESE website. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I think we need to have a presentation for the public so that everyone is educated to the process. Obviously, not everyone is aware that there is a link for the rulemaking process.
We can make a presentation before.
I mean, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, but I mean, at a meeting.
But we can, if you'd like, Ms. Beebe, and if others obviously have brought it up before, we can, how we have some policy discussions prior to committee agendas on some days. We can certainly put that as one of the items and bring that forward if you'd like. It's not a
Well,
problem.
I think the public would have to
Sure.
have that knowledge so that knowing where to access
Sure.
the link
It's a good
and
idea.
then an explanation of how to follow the.
Sure, let's follow up and
The process.
let's get that scheduled. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor. It's to amend item 6 on page 12 of the code, and there's a second. So is there any further discussion?
And just one additional question,
Mhm.
clarification. So that we're only addressing the one concern, item 6, of all those concerns brought to our attention.
That's what the motion is, but keeping in mind this goes out for notice of intent, and there's public comment that'll come back and that can be addressed. I mean, that's the motion on the floor right now.
That's not the original motion.
No, it's not. The original motion was as presented in the packet. Any objection to the motion?
I do.
Ms.
Hill and
Dr. Beebe and Ms. Hill?
Mhm.
Motion carries. Next item.
Page 151, item 10.1, consideration of the minimum foundation program task force. The recommendations are to approve the membership and process and receive the schedule and topics.
So this task force is an outcome, I think, of our March meeting, maybe the one after that. It's the overall goal of the task force is to bring the stakeholders together, to have open discussion and debate and input so that we can prepare for the 2014-2015 MFP. And we also are certainly very aware that with the state's financial situation and all of the change in policy in the last few years, a discussion is needed, and it's intended to be a very open and transparent process to do that. The committee makeup is on page 152. Some of the membership here are being appointed by the different associations. There's also membership here from the board that's been assigned, and there's been nominees for other appointments that the board would make since the last meeting when recommendations were asked for and some have been attained. So I'm going to stop there and see what discussion the board may have at this stage on that piece of it. And Dr. Beebe?
Okay, I realized after reviewing this chart that we left out a very important group, and that's the Louisiana Association of School Business Officials.
Mhm.
These are our consisting of our school chief financial officers.
Certainly.
And I think they would certainly have a major voice in the conversation and should be included within this group, because after all, they have to have a good understanding of the MFP. So I think we should, and I would be prepared to offer a motion to that effect, or substitute motion, whatever the case may be, to include a member or a representative of the Louisiana Association of School Business Officials.
Dr. Beebe, I appreciate your input. My response to that is I think they're represented well through their district superintendents and principals that are on the board. They we would invite them to come and present because they are technical experts, as I understand, in these districts. They are the ones that really understand the MFP, and will certainly be reached out to and asked to come participate to support the technical side of this into the input.
But I would have to bring forth the concern that it's one thing to be in the audience and it's another to be a member or a representative on the committee. So again, I mean, they're bringing their knowledge and expertise to the discussion. And I mean, that's my position.
I understand. Yeah, the two things we as the board have already voted on the group that we have here. If there wants to be a motion under this item, if you'd like to amend the makeup of it, then we can certainly do that in this session and see what the will of the board is.
Well, I amend the motion to include a representative from the Louisiana Association of School Business Officials.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Ms. Hill? Okay.
Oh, do we need to vote on this item first before?
We will need to vote on this item because we have several others to address here, yes. This is on the floor now.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So I was also contacted by the same group that Dr. Beebe's referring to and have thought about this as I've reviewed the materials in my packet. One of the problems I foresee, though, if we add another group, is that we're going to end up with an even number committee, and so then we would probably want to add another person. And so as I've thought about how we've tried to make sure that this group was of a size that it could be productive and come back to the board with a recommendation, that's a concern that I have that I want to share with the board before we make this vote.
Thank you, Ms. Bophy.
But if we do, then I have ideas of other people we can add, so.
Yeah. I have, it's interesting that with Ms. Bophy that I do, when she talks about the even number, because it's one individual that I like to add to the group, which is in the special education disability arena as well. So I guess from that perspective, should we just collaboratively vote on both individuals, or?
Ms. Hill, there's a motion on the floor, and it's up to the will of the board as to whether there wants to be a second to that motion, and I mean an amendment to it, or to vote on it as it is.
You can amend it.
Well,
one of the I do know that one of the parent nominees is a parent of a special ed student, very knowledgeable.
And correct, and I understand that this parent that we have on that's the representative of the board. But however, when you look at the teaching, you look at the foundation that this group has been founded on and working with hundreds of parents throughout the state of Louisiana, I wanted to recommend Ashley McReynolds, who is the leader of this actual group that has come to all BESE meetings, they've been very outspoken, they've been working diligently with the legislators, and this individual has actually contacted Senator Claytor, and she's the one that pointed out all of the discrepancies within the MFP regarding students with disabilities. So I felt that she would be a great asset to this MFP committee as well. And I know she reached out to other members as well. So,
Mr. Chairman, may I provide some context?
Sure.
Members, I think two things just to take into consideration. Number one, there's a difference between, not that anyone's saying there isn't, but I think it's important to point out, between the committee, whose job it is to interpret all of the feedback that's received from a diversity of viewpoints, and the information that's provided to the committee. I think there is no way to, within a committee, capture all of the expertise that needs to be brought to bear by the committee. That's why the committee takes testimony. And I say that not because of any desire, whether it's the Association of Special Educators, whether it's the career educators, whether it's the business officers, out of any disrespect to any of them, they are all critical parties to this process. But simply to say that you have already added 7 members to this committee over the last 2 or 3 months already, making it a committee of, I believe, 21 members. That is an extremely large committee. It has a diversity of educators, which you added, union officials, which you added, school board members, which you added, parents, which you added for the express purpose of adding parents and a special education voice. So we added, you have in front of you a parent of a child with disabilities who is also a member of our special education advisory panel. You added more board members as well. And so I say all of that to just suggest that we approved at the last meeting, after much negotiation, a membership. We have brought back to you, per your charge to us, a set of recommended specific members. And I think it's important to go forward with this group at a reasonable size. The other thing you'll note is that on the presentation Mr. Garvey was going down the road of, the first meeting as proposed is a meeting just to take public comment on what should be the content of the subsequent 3 meetings. And I think that's important to note, because if the Association of Business Officers, for example, were to say these are the things that need to be covered, I would imagine the committee, many of which are not domain experts, would take that very seriously and would include that in subsequent meetings. So I take the point. I just want to give you caution, as this is your committee, that the more we stack onto the membership of the committee, as opposed to saying we're going to take testimony, I think the more confusion you get in the process when you're not really sacrificing any information. You'll get all the information you need through testimony, but you're going to add more layers of process if we continue to grow the size. We've already grown at 50%.
Mr. Romer?
I appreciate the effort thus far and the information that we've already received in terms of outlining kind of the next steps. Will, in fact, I mean, is it you, I think, are chairing the task force. I mean, will you actually invite groups for specific testimony? I mean, more so than just come to sit in the audience and make a random comment. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Garvey?
I'd like to agree with Mr. White and say that I think this committee is already larger than it should be, but if we're going to open it up to expanding it, then I have several that I would like to add also. But as I said, I think it's large enough as it is, and I would encourage that we keep it where it is right now.
Mr. Garvey? We have about a half a dozen or so comment cards. I'm going to go to public comment and see what they would be, and then we'll come back and address the motion on the floor, and then several others we need to act upon for this particular item. Jim, is it Mahone? Malone? Louisiana Association of School Board Officers. School Business Officers, okay.
Yes, Jim Malone. I'm Chief Financial Officer for St. Charles Parish Schools and representing the Louisiana Association of School Business Officials. I've been a school business official for 31 years. I've gone back to the original formulas prior to Marilyn Langley, prior to Beth C&O. I work with the formula every day, very knowledgeable of the formula, and I can't believe that in every task force it's the BESE has ever had on the MFP formula, there's never been a task force that did not have a business official in it. We understand the formula. We know it better than anyone else. We know the impact of any change that you make to the formula will have on all the districts and the students. I would respectfully request that you consider having a school business official on the task force. I believe we can give you a lot of input in the discussion, and I have served on one of the task force before. There's a big difference between only presenting testimony at one meeting and having discussion throughout the entire process. I believe we can bring a lot to the table, and I would look forward to having a representative from our organization working on the task force with your approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Malone. Appreciate your input.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make a comment?
Yes, sir.
I want to echo and support what Mr. Malone just said. He is a most knowledgeable school business official, knows more about the MFP than probably anybody else in the state, and I just appreciate his service.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Michael Falk. Mr. Falk, Louisiana Association of School Superintendents.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and ladies and gentlemen of the board. Two things. First of all, I had received a couple of calls from superintendents, as Ms. Peugeot did, about business official and a rural superintendent, and I think you're going to take one of those matters up. Well, the second thing that I'd like to call attention to is, 21 years ago, we began work on a new MFP, and myself and Doris Volche and I think Mr. Lee were some of the original people who started working on the MFP. The MFP is not a simple formula. It's very complicated and complex. And what I would like for y'all to consider is you've laid out tentative meeting dates and topics. And Mr. Gill, you mentioned about having something for the 2014-15 MFP. I think we need to consider breaking it down into first short-term recommendations, things that can be implemented with minor tweaking of the formula and not so much of an impact on the school system's long-term impact. And then take a little bit longer time to look at really critical issues in the formula, because the MFP affects the funding of every school system in the state, whether you're considered one of the more wealthy or less wealthy districts. And it's time that it be addressed, but I think it has to take some time to work through, to look at it, because education has changed in the 21 years. The state's financial situation has changed in the 21 years. And for next year, I don't think there's too much that needs to be done, because we already have the $69 million that has to be rolled into the base per pupil amount into the formula and looked at. So I would ask for consideration for short-term recommendations, which can be implemented rather quickly, not causing too much of an impact for the 14-15 year, and then spending a little bit longer time to look for long-term recommendations that can be considered in the fiscal session in 2015.
Appreciate that suggestion. Thank you, Superintendent Falk. Lee Barrios, Dr. Peugeot, Superintendent's Association.
I just want to echo what Superintendent Falk said about the complexity of the formula and the need to really think about, obviously we have to come up with a solution for next year, for next fiscal year. But beyond that, I think we need to come up with some long-term solutions as to how are we going to, some fundamental questions about how we're going to fund public education. And so I think the discussion that we need to have is something that is more complex than can meet the meeting schedule that we currently have set up. And so I just want to urge the board to really consider, yes, we have to deal with what we're going to do for next school year, but more importantly, I think we have some long-term decisions to make relative to how do we fund public education in the 21st century and come to some agreement about what our long-term solutions are going to be.
Yeah, thank you for your input. Appreciate that. Dr. Finney?
Thank you. The first thing I'd like to mention is that I saw that members of the board received some sort of handout at the beginning of this discussion, which, believe it or not, I really don't care about the contents of. But pretending for the sake of discussion that I did, it would be nice if you had a process so that that would be available to members of the public that wanted to know what the additional information was and don't happen to have a computer in front of them.
Dr. Finney, if you don't mind, would you please come up and get this?
I totally understand.
We aim to please.
Thank you. And I can see both sides of the committee size issue, because there's a big difference between only getting 1, 3 to 5 to whatever minute shot at a topic versus a member of the board, committee, task force, or whatever body that has an opportunity after hearing other discussion to come back with one more opportunity to speak. But in my opinion, the ideal size of a committee is 3, and the third person is only there to break a tie. So I'm agnostic as to who should or should not be included on this. But the backup material that's in the back of the room does not list the designated representatives for the individuals that are going to be representing each of those interest groups. and I would hope they be named specifically soon, and the specific meeting dates are not included. And as soon as those can be set, it would allow those of us that might have an interest in the discussion.
Any other comments?
That was all.
Thank you for your input. Scott Richard?
Thank you, Chairman Guillot. Just want to commend the board and Superintendent White for being more inclusive rather than exclusive as this process has gotten to this point, and would respectfully request you take into account the testimony of the dedicated, lifelong education professionals that testified just a few minutes ago in regards to this monumental task that affects every child in Louisiana, short-term and long-term, and would certainly applaud your consideration and efforts if you were to take into consideration the length of time that we have allotted now, and looking at expanding those timelines to really delve into the intricacies of a very complicated task that lies before us. Thank you.
Appreciate your input. Sean Fleming?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the board. Sean Fleming with Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council. Last time I presented this same request, it was about 9:30, 12 hours into y'all BESE meeting, and I think my points may have not been clear either out of my mouth or through your ears because of how much time y'all spent. Every other member that is represented on that the MFP task force is a representative, and that was the discussion that came forth, is instead of just having a principal or a superintendent, have someone who is representing a larger group. And that was what my request was for students with disabilities. There was an offer on the table last year to make the biggest changes in the MFP formula for students with disabilities, and it would have impacted them more than anybody else. So while it is greatly appreciated that y'all included a parent with a child with a disability, I strongly recommend that y'all consider someone who also represents many parents. And Ms. Hill, I want to just commend you for that nomination. Since y'all want to do it in pairs, I'm the son of an ex-CFO of an LEA. My dad served as Chief Financial Officer. He's, rest in peace, he's been gone a few years, so he won't bother y'all. But if y'all want it in pairs, I'll second the motion with the other person as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Any other board discussion? That's the end of the public comment period. We have a motion on the floor and a second to add a business officer to the makeup of the task force. Dr. Beebe?
Just to reiterate my concern, I mean, here we're setting or establishing a committee without a school chief financial officer. I mean, this is the expert. We need someone with the knowledge and expertise of school finance, as I see it, and the gentleman who just spoke, I would nominate him specifically to serve. And I don't have a problem including a representative for the special needs population. So what? We need a committee that is functional, that is knowledgeable, and that will take on this tremendous challenge of moving us forward with the minimum foundation program.
Thank you, Dr. Beebe.
If I may amend my motion to include the school business officer and the representative
from LaTeach.
Abby, you gonna?
Well, Mr.
Oh yeah, and Ms.
LaCan, I think it is.
Yeah, is it? Yeah, LaCan. LaTeach.
LaTeach.
Ashley McReynolds from LaTeach, which is a special.
Ms. Hill, are you seconding that amended motion? Okay. Would you give me the clarification, Andrew, you have? Go ahead and read it to the group, please.
Can you just clarify if you want a representative from the organization, the president from the organization, who from those organizations you'd like to participate?
Well, to be consistent with, I want the gentleman in the back. He has 30-plus years. What is your name, sir? Jim Malone. I am nominating Jim Malone as a representative of the school business officials. And Ms. Hill is recommending, your person is?
Ms. Ashley McReynolds from the Teach Organization.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes. Ashley McReynolds?
She's from the Teach.
Which is the,
She's the president?
she's the leader, one of the team leaders. Would you
So this will, then to clarify, this will be a board appointment, and then specifically those individuals.
Yeah, those are my numbers.
Would you read the amended motion, please?
Sorry, who's the second? I couldn't hear the second person nominated.
Ashley
No, her name is Ashley McReynolds. And she's with the LaTeach Organization, which is an organization that are advocates throughout the state for children with disabilities. And so they meet with hundreds of parents throughout the state to find out what the needs are of children with disabilities. She was one of the team leaders that contacted Senator Claytor in reference to the discrepancies with the MFP, which she worked diligently with him on this project, which came back to BESE about the special ed population.
I understand, yeah. Okay, so would you read the motion, please?
Substitute motion by Ms. Beebe, seconded by Ms. Hill, to add to the MFP Task Force Committee a member of the Louisiana Association of School Business Officials, meaning Mr. Jim Malone, and Ms. Ashley McReynolds with LaTeach.
Okay, prior to vote, as the chairman of the task force, my input is that we do not add additional positions, and not that these aren't great organizations. We already have 21 members on this task force, which is going to be a real challenge to manage in itself. I will advocate that they'll have plenty of opportunity to come and to present and to let the technical side of this be heard so that this task force can utilize that information and act upon it. So as the chair of that task force, that's my input.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I would ask for a division of the motion.
It's up to Dr. Beebe.
No, it's not.
You want to vote on them separately, is what you're
Yes.
asking? Okay.
That's right.
I'm okay with that.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? I know some other members have said that if members are added, they may have other names they want to put on there. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but we may want to see if there are other thoughts
Sure.
that other members have.
Thank you, Mr. Wagasback. Mr. Garvey, I think you had some other members you wanted to consider if we added.
I'd have to get the list. I can come back and bring the list tomorrow.
Okay.
There's 4 or 5.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Garvey. Ms. Bofi?
I just hesitate to do that. I respect the work that you're putting into it, Mr. Gio, as the chairman of the committee, and as much as there would be other people that we could name to be part of it, I respect your position not to want to increase the numbers.
Thank you. Okay, so let's...
Mr. Gio, come to think of it, this will come back to the board tomorrow because it's going just as a recommendation. So I'm going to wait and see whether this passes or not. If it passes, then I will come back tomorrow with the additional members that I would suggest be added. But if it fails, then we'll just leave it as it is being recommended as 21 members, I think it is.
Thank you, Mr. Garvey. Okay, let's...
I do have a question, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I know we have to wrap this up. Specifically about the business professional's position. Is there any more, have we done any thinking about why that position initially wasn't added? Or is it just literally that we thought the superintendents would speak for them? I just want to make sure I understand full rationale.
I do agree with what Mr. Malone said, which is that there's a lot of technical expertise. Problem is that what the group was originally designed to be representative of bodies. And, unfortunately, when you're talking about huge constituencies like school boards or district administrations or teachers or parents, I mean, after a time, it gets to be a pretty, hefty set of groups. And so we originally, and this was part of the discussion last time, we made a commitment not to try to subdivide those things. So in other words, we have principals and teachers, but we don't have counselors. We don't have personnel directors. We don't have curriculum or assistant superintendents. And you could go on and on. I have myself, as with many of you, been contacted by many people. And look, I absolutely agree with what everybody said. I'm sure Mr. Malone, I'm sure Lateach, these are valuable voices that need to be heard, absolutely. It's just a question of management. And I have to say, I would say the same to Mr. Garvey as he suggests adding more people. And Mr. Garvey, I regret having to say this, whoever it is, I just don't know that it wouldn't make our jobs any easier for anybody on this committee.
Superintendent, just one thought. I think there are two competing ideas here that I'm trying to disentangle. One is just the notion of being as inclusive as possible, and I know many of the board members have made that point and would add more members based on that. But the point that I was compelled by Mr. Malone, I want to make sure I have your name correctly, Malone, was the technical expertise that particular function brings to this topic. And so I'm trying to sort of disentangle the two. There's the inclusivity point, but then there's the point about actual technical expertise and the fact that function might actually add value given how they interact with the actual formula. And I just wanted a little bit more context as to whether or not that's a point well taken from your perspective as superintendent.
I think it is a point well taken, but I also think that that's different from being a representative on a committee. You all regularly vote on issues where you're not the experts. The experts are called to provide very specific technical testimony, and your job is to represent a constituency and reacting to it. That's the job of this committee too. You have those who are supposed to advocate for school systems, those who are going to advocate for school boards, those who are going to advocate for classroom needs, those who are going to advocate for parents and the needs of home and families. Those representative voices will filter the information provided by domain experts. Please recall, last meeting we started with 14 members. We are now at 21. The reason we're at 21 is the exact same reason that we're considering debating that Mr. Garvey and Ms. Beebe or Dr. Beebe are recommending more members here today. One, people wanted special education voice. People wanted more parent voice. People wanted more teacher voice. People wanted more union voice. People wanted more school board voice. All of those have been added. People wanted more BESE voice. All of those have been added to this in the last 2 months. We're going down a bit of a slippery slope toward a time when, we've got, it's like the NCAA tournament, we've got 64 teams in this thing. We've got to, I think, admit that the committee is good, it's representative, we've done what you've asked us to do, and then really invite in Mr. Malone, Lateach, and others to provide excellent testimony.
Okay, so we're going to vote on these separately.
Point of order.
Yes,
Do we need is that a motion by Mr. Lee to separate them? Do we need a second, or is that something that he can request or demand by right?
I'm going to have to ask the experts on Robert rules about that.
I can't answer that.
I'll let you decide.
I'll allow it.
Pardon me?
I'll allow it. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a recommendation?
Yes.
We may want to consider, and again, I'm not knowledgeable of some of these names and the roles they play, so pardon me if this is not correct. It sounded like the testimony said one of the parents here on this list are representing that role of a special needs parent. There's been an alternate parent that's been recommended today. Perhaps the motion could be to have the Lateach representative replace one of these parents. I know as my role in this committee, I'll also be representing that voice as well for special needs parent. And so, that may be an option to replace that parent with the Lateach representative if that's the best voice to articulate that. And the other piece, the school budget officers, they're providing a very technical and substantive piece on how the formula works. That may be something similar to what the PAR representative would offer. Perhaps they could replace the PAR representative. And so if that helps keep the numbers, if you're worried about having a board that gets too large to control, perhaps those two people could replace those current members and keep the numbers at a suitable number for you.
Appreciate that suggestion, Mr. Wagesback.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
To muddy it a little bit more, and I would hope this would not require a motion, but if it does, I'll make a motion. But that since we're about to vote on the school business officials, that he be non-voting member of the committee. A member, but a non-voting member.
Well, you'll have to ask Dr. Beebe if she wants to amend her
I'm not
motion.
asking anybody.
There's a motion on the floor, and if you'd like to amend that motion, you're welcome to.
Okay, then I'll amend the motion in voting on the school business officials, that he be a non-voting member.
Dr. Beebe, do you accept that to your motion?
No.
Okay, so,
What she said?
no.
Okay,
You
is
don't
there,
have to accept it. The motion belongs to the body,
Okay, we're going to vote on the motion as it is then.
and you're not accepting it.
Vote against it.
I'm sorry.
May I just suggest, in response, I know I recognize it's not the motion on the floor, but I would say that just as somebody staffing this committee, as our team would be staffing this committee, that would be a way of taking in the technical expertise adequately, I think, without adding to the management problem.
Mr. Gill, I just wanted to just piggyback on what Mr. Wackerspack mentioned, that we do have a parent, and she sits on the special advisory committee, so she's already on a committee in reference to advocating for children with special needs. So I think having a representative from Luteach sitting on this committee, it would still, weigh both ends, because she's already on one committee and then being on that committee and this committee, just giving other opportunities to other organizations and communities. So I agree with what he said in reference to that.
Oh, about her potentially replacing one of the other members that are proposed?
Yes, he made a
Okay.
comment in reference to that.
Okay, what I'd like to do to move us along here, let's vote on the motion on the floor. If it's voted in, great. If not, Mr. Lee, you're welcome to offer another motion that it be a non-voting member. Right now, we have two motions on the floor. We have one for the business officer, and we have one for the special ed position. So I'd like to go ahead and vote on the business officer position as a representative, as a voting member of the committee. Okay.
Well, now, since we're dividing it, it's just to, a substitute motion by Ms. Beebe, seconded by Ms. Hill, to add the following member to the MFP task force, and that is Mr. Jim Malone of the Louisiana Association of School Business Officials. That's the first vote.
And this vote is as a voting member or not?
As a voting member.
Well, no.
This is
As a voting member. Roll call.
Okay. Ms. Beebe?
Yes.
Ms. Beebe votes yes. Ms. Bophy?
no,
Ms. Bophy votes no. Ms. Bradford? Is she here? I'm sorry.
She had
Ms.
to
Bradford is
No.
not present. Mr. Garvey?
No.
Mr. Garvey votes no. Ms. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Hill votes yes. Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Dr. Moranti? I didn't hear you.
no,
Dr. Moranti votes no. Ms. Orange Jones?
no,
Ms. Orange Jones votes no. Mr. Romer?
No.
Mr. Romer votes no. Mr. Waggesback?
No.
Mr. Waggesback votes no. Do you want to vote?
No. Motion.
I did. I'm sorry.
Okay, now we have a
Yes,
second.
6 no and 3 yes.
So the motion does not carry. It doesn't, it
failed.
fails.
Motion failed.
Okay, so there's another motion now to go to the special ed position as a voting member, and we need to vote on it.
Yes.
Okay, would you?
Roll call.
No, would you state the motion,
Oh, I'm
please?
sorry.
You did roll call.
Substitute motion by Ms. Hill, seconded by Ms. Beebe, to add the following member to the MFP Task Force Committee. From the Lateach Organization, Ms. Ashley McReynolds.
Yes, and I like a roll call.
Okay, Ms. Beebe?
Yes.
Ms. Beebe votes yes. Ms. Bophy?
no,
Ms. Bophy votes no. Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bradford is not present. Mr. Garvey?
No.
Mr. Garvey votes no. Ms. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Hill votes yes. Mr. Lee?
No.
Mr. Lee votes no. Dr. Moranti?
no,
Dr. Moranti votes no. Ms. Orange Jones?
yes,
Ms. Orange Jones votes yes. Mr. Romer?
No.
Mr. Romer votes no. Mr. Waggesback?
Yes.
Mr. Waggesback votes yes. We have 5 noes and 4 yeses. we don't have enough to break a tie, even if you vote. It'll be even.
What's the vote?
You have a 2/3 vote, right? Yeah, well,
No.
okay, we have 6 no and 4 yes. Motion failed.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to move that
Okay, wait just a minute, Mr. Lee. Okay, Mr. Lee.
I'd like to move that a school business official be added to the committee as a non-voting member.
Okay, is there a second to the motion? Dr. Beebe seconds it. Any discussion? Okay, let's have a roll call.
Okay. Ms. Beebe?
Yes.
Ms. Beebe votes yes. Ms. Bophy?
Yes.
Ms. Bophy votes yes. Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bradford is not present. Mr. Garvey?
No.
Mr. Garvey votes no. Ms. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Hill votes yes. Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Dr. Moranti?
Yes.
Dr. Moranti votes yes. Ms. Orange Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Orange Jones votes yes. Mr. Romer?
Yes.
Mr. Romer votes yes. Mr. Wagasback?
Yes.
Mr. Wagasback votes yes. Motion passed.
Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Villa, I'd like to make a motion that a representative of the Teach organization be a part of the committee as a non-voting member as well.
And I second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second.
I'd like to make a substitute motion.
What do you need, Amber?
I'm just getting my
Ms.
paper
Bophy?
together. I didn't even get that.
Ms.
Ms. Hill
Bophy?
made a motion. And what was it?
Oh, the motion was to add a,
Oh, okay.
and can I speak to why I've made that decision? Because I think we do have a parent on the committee that is currently on the Special Education Advisory Committee. And I think to allow an organization to be a part of the MFP, who have worked diligently with legislators to make sure that this population voice is heard, I think having a parent serving on 2 committees, you know, just to show a fair process, I think we should add a representative as well.
Thank you for your input, Ms. Hill. Ms. Bophy?
So the substitute motion that I'd like to make, and I hope that it meets all of our needs based on the important points that Ms. Hill brought out, is that Ms. Reina Atala is a member that we're proposing to be on this board. I think because she serves on the Special Ed Advisory Panel, that gives her insight and information and also gives people access, additional access to her to help her think through the different things that will be proposed in this MFP task force. So, but what my substitute motion is that in the absence of Ms. Atala, that Ms. McReynolds would be able to serve as a voting member in her place.
Second.
Okay, we have a substitute motion and a second to the substitute motion that, what is your name? Ms. McReynolds would serve as a substitute to the current Rana Atala? Atala. Any discussion on the substitute motion?
I have a question. I mean, so she just serves in a substitute capacity unless otherwise, when there's an absent member?
Correct. And I anticipate that she'll be attending the meetings, just like I anticipate a number of the different groups will be attending, because there'll be public meetings.
But if
So-
Ms. Atala's not there, she gets the opportunity to vote.
Absolutely. We want to make sure that the special ed, that people are voting in mind of our special needs students.
Is there any objection to the substitute motion?
I just need a little bit of clarity.
Okay.
Am I understanding the motion that if the person already named is present, then she's the member?
That's correct.
That this one would serve only in her absence?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay.
I'm thinking about the numbers, Mr. Lee, of the committee. So I'm trying to think about the numbers while also representing the constituents.
I didn't understand.
She's just, Ms. Bophy said she's thinking about the numbers. She wants to make sure the constituency is represented.
But I think my concern is she's not a voting member, so she'll just be a part.
Well, she would be a voting member if she substituted for the current parent that's on here, because that is a voting position.
Okay. So this Atala is already the member?
Well,
And
we still need to vote on that. I mean, this is the proposed slate that we still need to vote on. Atala.
Okay, she's the member, but we would have a substitute.
Yes, ma'am.
in her. Okay.
That's correct. Ms. Jones?
Just point of clarification for Ms. Hill, does that substitute motion address the initial intent of your?
Well, I guess no, not really, because if you already have, I'm just looking at when we look at serving the public, and you already have someone that sits on the board, you know, she's already advocating in one aspect. And then having someone else with an organization throughout the state of Louisiana who meets with hundreds of parents and who work diligently with Senator Claytor on this project, that's why it came back to the board. I feel that her voice should be heard with the MFP because she brought it to his attention. And so having this individual serving in two capacities, I just think that's unfair when you have someone who really wants to represent, who worked diligently with the legislators and the senator to bring forth these, you know, discrepancies within the MFP. Give her the opportunity. That's my point on it.
Okay, so let's, yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
The only thing I would add is I think Ms. Bovee makes a good motion to try to solve a balancing act here, and I think I support the motion. Hope it passes.
Thank you, Mr. Wagsback. Okay, any objection to the motion, the substitute motion? Motion carries. Okay, the next item is relative to approving the proposed task force meeting process. Do I have a motion to approve it on page 153?
So moved.
Mr. Lee, is there a second? Mr. Wagasback? Okay. Okay. Any discussion on that item? Any objection? Motion carries. The next item is to receive the tentative meeting dates and topics, and I can tell you that these meeting dates that were passed out, and for the public, I'll tell you what they are. September 4th, September 23rd, October 21st, November 21st, and December 13th, and they'll be on the board website. This was no easy task to establish these just with the small group that, you know, that we've met with so forth, the key people. I mean, not key, but ones that certainly the chair and others that have to be there. So these are set. They'll be out for notification so the public will know. And I guess what we're asking is that you receive these tentative meeting dates and topics. And as the board chair, I'm sure there'll be a lot of great discussion and probably some adjustment along the way as we learn more in this process. So do I have a motion to receive this?
So moved. Second.
Second by Ms. Bophy. Mr. Romer made the motion. Any discussion?
I just want to thank the staff at BESE for pulling this together. It sounds so simple, but it's so hard, and they do a great job on logistics, and I want to thank them publicly as well.
Okay, that concludes the Admin and Finance Committee.